Welcome to Mr. Nightbleed. Tonight, in 7 scary true stories from the world's most haunted cemeteries, we cross the rusted gates of graveyards where names are carved in stone, flowers wilt overnight, and the earth itself remembers what we try to forget. These are chilling tales of bells that ring with no wind, voices whispering from cracked mausoleums, and footsteps crunching over gravel when no one is there. This is a brand new channel, and my goal this month is 2,000 subscribers. Almost 90% of people who watch never subscribe, they just fade back into the dark. Don't be one of them. Before we begin, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it for you right now? And if there's a cemetery in your town that gives you chills, type its name. Because once you step past the gates of the world's most haunted cemeteries, some things follow you home. Kill the lights, mute the world. Let's begin. I took the night watch job at Greyfriars because I needed something quiet. After the split and the move to a one-room flat off Candlemaker Row, quiet felt like a goal I could actually reach. The council contract was temporary, mostly locking up after the last ghost tour went through, keeping kids from climbing, shooing the drunk and the lost out of the grass. A lot of walking and listening. I like walking and listening. It makes your thoughts line up. You sign out your keys at dusk in a little room that smells like old carpet cleaner and thermos coffee. The key ring is heavier than you expect. Stamped numbers that come away on your palm in faint circles. There's a radio, a logbook with times to initial when you pass certain points, and a laminated map nobody needs because you end up knowing the paths better than your own street. The first week, Moira showed me the loop. She'd been on nights for 18 years. Hard to tell how much older she was than me under the green parka, but the way she talked to the stones, you could feel it. Nothing in here's out to get you, she told me. It's just old. Walk like you're a guest. No stamping. If you see teenagers with Tesco bags, ask nice before you ask loud. And never make fun of anybody in front of the Black Mausoleum. People hear that. They remember your voice. We passed the iron gates of the Covenanters' prison as she said it, and even in summer it felt like a door into cooler air had opened. Tourists put coins there sometimes, silver bright on black iron. I made a joke about ghosts tipping well and she didn't laugh. Only said, you'll sleep better if you don't. My first 2 weeks ran smooth. Midnight is a strange kind of honest. The wind makes a different kind of noise through the trees when the buses stop and the city quiets. I learned where my boots struck the old stone at the same angle every time. How the light from the kirk floods the top stones and leaves the low wall along the Flodden steps in shadow. I learned the habits of the foxes, the last tours, the 2 students who tried to climb for a photo at the Greyfriars Bobby statue and left in a hurry when I asked what their mum would think. I learned that if you make your radio check-ins in a normal voice, your heartbeat stays normal too. It started with dust. That's what I keep coming back to when I tell it. Greyfriars stones aren't dusty like a bookshelf. They're rough, lichen-bitten, flocked with the grit of centuries that lives in the carved letters. A dry spell settled over Edinburgh that September. Leaves crumbled underfoot like paper. When wind moved through the yard at night, it picked up a skin-thin layer of grit and laid it down again in the same way you can see where a book sat on a shelf for years. There's a box tomb slab on the east path, low enough to use as a bench if you don't know better. I'd sat on it the first week before Moira's voice settled permanent in my head about respect. The slab has a family name so worn you can't read it without knowing it already. The night I noticed the dust, the slab looked like it had been sugar dusted, a light coat over the letters and the smooth parts where hands sometimes brush as they pass. My name was written across it. First name and last block letters like a kid learning to print. It stopped me so clean my breath made a cloud I could see. I thought, of course, of the kids. Chalk is common. People do rubbings, trace dates with crayons and paper. I stooped and rubbed at it with my glove. The letters smeared. The dust came away on the brown leather, gray streaks like I'd wiped a car window. I wiped until it was just a blurry patch. Felt stupid for how quick my heart was going and walked on. The loop takes you past the kirk, over by the Flodden wall, back behind the school. 10 minutes later I came back to the slab and my name was there again. Cleaner than before. Same block letters, same spacing. The kind of neat that makes you think of a chalkboard and a teacher saying once more carefully. I said something to the air that would have got me told off in church and rubbed it out again. I pressed harder, ground my palm in. The grit squealed under the glove like sugar on a countertop. The smell of old stone lifted with it, cool and stale and a little sweet. I walked away, shaking my head, feeling dramatic, making a note in the logbook just to anchor myself in something I could look at later. For the next hour, I thought about everything except what I wasn't thinking about. You know when you try to decide not to think of a song and then there it is, the riff looping every 3 steps? On the third pass, I went straight to the slab. I didn't pretend I didn't want to see it. The dust was smoother than before, a faint haze like breath on glass, and there my name sat. Same letters, less messy edges, like someone had cleaned the slate just to write it again. I told Moira about it the next shift. She listened without interrupting, nodding at the parts about the dust and the weather, and then she said, "What glove did you use?" "Right," I said, "because that's the one I wipe with." She held out her hand. I gave her the glove. She turned it over, thumbed the edge where the leather meets the stitching, held it up to the light by the office window. "Give me your phone," she said. She took my glove into the little loo and turned off the light. From the door, she reached the glove back toward the window, and then she took a photo with my phone. In the photo, in the ordinariness of the light and the old scuffed tiles that have been gray since the 70s, the glove looked the same. But on the palm where I had pressed to wipe my name away, there was a handprint. Not the impression of the glove. A human hand, skin ridges and all, the kind of print you see on a crime show when they dust for it. My glove looked like it had a ghost of a hand wearing it from the inside. "I wore this," I said, too fast. "I had it on the whole time." "Maybe you didn't," she said in that voice that isn't unkind. "Maybe you pushed harder than you remember. Don't give the place away to claim you, Liam." She said my name gently, and I felt annoyed at the superstition of it. So annoyed I took the glove back, pulled both on, and went out early to start the loop. You can hear your pride in your boots when you step 2 split. That was a Monday. On Tuesday, I made myself not go to the slab first. I did the loop exactly. I checked locks with my left hand. I said hello to the fox by the wall like always. I radioed my position at the black mausoleum with the same words I always use. At the slab, I stared without moving. The dust looked almost leveled, the faintest ripple where letters had been, like someone had erased a chalkboard with a clean cloth and then breathed on it. I took a photo with my phone. The photo showed the slab with my name in a thread-thin script I would never use. On the slab before my eyes, there were no letters at all. It's a small thing, a photo not matching a thing. Phones mess up, but I felt my scalp prickle the way it does when your hat gets too tight and you can't take it off fast enough. I reached to wipe nothing and stopped. Moira's voice. "Don't give the place away." I lowered my hand. I walked on. Twice more that night I passed the slab and made myself look and made myself not touch. It felt like the way you stand on a bus when a fight starts at the back and you look at the window instead. The third night, Ken from council called just as I started my shift. A noise complaint. A man in a flat overlooking the yard heard knocking. I did the loop with my radio up, expecting the sound of kids on stone, maybe the metallic clank of someone shaking a gate. The yard had a quiet that wasn't the usual kind. Even the wind sounded like it had put socks on. I picked up the knock at the same place every time I came past it. 3 dull taps, then a pause. Then 2 old stone make sounds. Heat and cold do things you can look up. I tried to look it up on my phone, got half a paragraph about thermal expansion, and felt like an idiot for looking it up in a graveyard at 1 in the morning. The knocks came again and I followed them like a child does. Not because it makes sense, but because it's a game you know the rules to. I ended up at the slab. The dust looked heavier, a skin you could write in. I didn't touch it. I set my phone on video and held the camera steady, and I watched the blankness of it. The knocks came. 3 paused too. My other hand drifted to the top of the stone without me telling it to. I felt grit on leather. I jerked back like I'd burned myself, and the dust lifted in a swirl. It settled again, and there was my name again, as neat as if a teacher had written it. The video burned through my battery because I forgot to stop it. When I watched it later, you can see my gloved hand start to reach, and then you can see faintly, as if something was writing underwater. Letters form where the glove would have been if I hadn't moved. The sound that goes with it is just the wind already going and my breath already there. There's that moment where you think you hear something like a syllable, but it almost always resolves into your own noise if you aren't careful. I don't show the video to people anymore because if they hear anything, it's the word they fear most that night. On Thursday, the dust spelled my full name, middle initial and all. Nobody who knows me uses my middle name. I stood longer than I should have. The knocks became a heartbeat. 3 pause 2. My radio decided to crackle on its own and then cut out, and I had to stop myself from swearing into it. I took a photo for proof so that I could laugh with it later and say, "See, teenagers." In the photo, beside my name, there's a handprint pressed into the dust. Smaller than mine. Hand to hand, a stranger meeting a stranger. The glove in the photo is visible on my hand. That makes no sense to write down, but I am writing it down because that is what the photo shows. I told myself I was sleeping badly. That's not a lie. You bring the yard home with you. The smell of old stone and damp bark gets into your jacket and your hair. You start leaving the radio noise on your phone at low volume while you fold laundry. You put your boots by the door and find gray grit in the treads in the morning, when you didn't walk anywhere but the kitchen. That night in my flat, I wiped steam from the bathroom mirror after a shower and saw the faintest shapes in the wet behind my hand, like someone had written there and been erased and was waiting for breath to make it visible again. I dried the mirror with a towel and then I went back 4 times to check. I slept 2 hours sitting up with the light on. I went to work early. Moira wasn't on and Ken had his feet up on the desk with an old football magazine. He looked at me over his glasses and said, "The man with the complaints left town for the weekend." "Lucky you." "Did he say where the knocks were coming from?" I asked. Ken shrugged. "Place is full of knocks. This city is a knock that hasn't finished yet." He half smiled when he said it, but I watched his hands not touch the keys when he said the word lucky. That night, I reached the slab and the dust had made itself into something that turned my mouth dry. It wasn't my name. It was a date. The day before. I wiped it. I use the word wipe because that's the word that fits, but it was more like the dust tired of me touching it and leapt to my glove to get away. I stood with gray on brown leather and felt the childishness of writing a date on stone and the adult terror of not choosing to do that. I walked away faster than I should have for a job where you keep your pace because your pace keeps you. On the way by the Black Mausoleum, I felt the cold you get there and then a second cold inside it. The first is like a cellar. The second is like a breath drawn in by a mouth near your ear that doesn't release it. I didn't stop. I didn't make a joke. I checked my radio in my normal voice and the speaker hissed like the city did when buses were coal. I told myself I wouldn't go back to the slab on that round. I cut across by the school and up the steps and around. Keys heavy at my belt. Streetlight dripped through leaves like honey. The yard had the feeling you get when the person you live with leaves and you can hear the house at its own life. The slab was waiting when I gave up trying to avoid it. It looks like arrogance to write it like that. It's the only word that fits. The dust spelled my name and beneath it a second line I could not make out. I used my phone light even though it's better if you don't because a narrow beam gives you shadows and shadows print things you wish they wouldn't. The second line was a place, not Greyfriars, not Edinburgh. My childhood village in Fife, the name written the way my gran did on Christmas tags, letters pinched at the waist, a flourish at the end she'd never taught me to do. I hadn't been home in years. 3, pause 2, I took the glove off. I don't tell people that part when I tell it in a pub because I don't like the look it puts in their eyes. I took the glove off because it felt wrong to touch my gran's handwriting with leather. I pressed my bare palm to the dust the way you press a hand on a window you're about to close on somebody's words, so they can see you for 1 second before the glass goes opaque again. The dust clung. It felt like the softest sand, like flour, and under it the stone wasn't cold at all. It was body warm. That's what made me jerk back. That and the sensation you get when you touch a forehead, and you feel the person on the other side of it with the pads of your fingers. I looked at my hand, and in the lines where skin scours dirt there was gray, like the handprint on the photo moved. I could have stopped then. I could have called Ken. I could have called Moira. I could have logged a note in big letters and left the yard and let the keys lie. The trouble with stories like this is that we want to believe the person has choices. It makes us feel safer to think a turning was possible. I think about that a lot. All I'll say is I was already in the turning before I knew it had a name. On the last round, a group of drunk students came through the gate at the far end and I walked them out with the gentle voice I save for boys who don't want to be embarrassed. They made promises like paper boats. The air had that pre-rain smell and then didn't rain. I went back to the slab. The dust letters had the look of something that has been wet and is drying again. My name, the village, and a third line where the dust had clumped into thicker strokes that made the letters seem deeper. I thought it would be a date. It was a word. Rest, I said it out loud by accident. I heard it come out like somebody testing a microphone. The 3 pause 2 came as if answering itself, and I saw it then. It had always been my name. 3 letters, pause 2, my first, my last. It's not a riddle, it's just a rhythm you don't question until you learn a lot about yourself. My phone buzzed with a low battery warning. The screen stayed light enough for me to see the video icon. I backed up 3 steps and hit record. I spoke my name and watched the dust. Nothing. I asked, "What do you want?" Nothing. I said, "If this is a joke, I get it." At my tone, something in the air between me and the slab changed shape the way a room does when a person stands up. The dust lifted and settled, and a 4th line under my name wrote itself. The letters formed with the patience of a person who has all night. They spelled out my street. Not the one by the yard, the one from the village, where the last time I'd stood with my hand on stone it had been black granite with my father's name carved in it. I hadn't said goodbye that day. I'd put my hand on the warm sunlit top and said nothing at all. I turned off the video. I don't know why that seems important, except that at the time it felt like helping. When I put my glove back on, dust fell from it as if I'd been sculpting a statue. The knock came once, not 3, and it came from under my feet. The slab had a hollow sound to it you would never notice if you didn't already have a name written on your nerves. I put my hand out as if to steady myself. I didn't touch the stone. The dust rose on its own and then divided as if a finger had cut a line through it. The shape was a box, a simple outline. And then in the box on one side a handprint appeared. It was mine. In the box on the other side another handprint appeared, smaller and warped like the lines didn't know all kinks from skin. The little finger was crooked at the top the way my little finger is from a football break when I was 12. I didn't run. That would be a simple tale. I walked back to the office with my hand in the air because the dust on it felt like a temperature my skin wasn't supposed to have. I put the keys down and the keys chimed. I set my phone on the desk. I stood with my arms out because I didn't know where to put them. Ken came in early for once, or time did something it isn't supposed to. He looked at me and then down at the dust around me on the floor, and he said, "All right," in the way a man says it to a dog on the verge of bolting. He walked to the kettle and made tea. He didn't ask and I didn't tell. We both stood while the water worked and the radio hissed, and in the kettle's tiny whistle I heard 3, then 2, and it made the hair on my arms lift. When my shift ended, I walked home with my gloves in my pockets and my hands bare. I didn't touch my phone. I didn't wash my hands until I had to. When I did, the water went gray and the smell off the sink was like roses somebody left in a room too warm and sweet. I dried with a towel and looked up and saw where I'd wiped steam from the mirror a week before, and I saw, not words, but the blanks where words had been. I wrote my name with my finger and felt stupid, and then watched as my name widened and smudged under my fingertip like somebody was writing along with me from the other side. I wiped the mirror clean with the towel and threw the towel in the bin and went to work like a person does, because something happens and you don't stop being the person you were. I've changed the way I walk the loop. I pass the slab at a distance where I can't see letters. I keep my eyes on the paths in the way you do in a hospital when you read numbers on doors and don't read the names. Students still climb. Foxes still pass with their businesslike trot. Tours still speak softly at the mausoleum and laugh too loudly walking away. But there are nights when the wind dies and a hush like inside a cupboard falls. And in that hush I hear the rhythm that belongs to me. 3, pause, 2, and a syllable that is the same in any language. Sometimes I open my phone and the video I didn't take plays. It's a small thing, a magic trick you could do with a bad app or a friend. Just the slab and grainy nightlight and my name appearing in the dust and my hand pulling back at the last second, while another hand presses inside the outline that isn't there. I delete it and it comes back, and when it comes back the file name is different by 1 number. The only piece of evidence I keep where I can see it is the photo Moira took of my glove with the human handprint in the palm. I keep it because it looks like someone made it for me. There are people who would call that affection. There are people who would call it a threat. I don't know which I am most nights. I didn't go home to Fife for my dad's stone in the years after he died. Not once after the funeral. This is the part where someone tells me the thing in Greyfriars is making me go, or asking me to stay, or marking me down, or giving me back a place I refused. People like a clean meaning. That's not the kind of story this is. I went on a Thursday in November with rain coming and the kind of wind that takes your umbrella and turns it into sculpture. The yard there is smaller, the stone newer, the grass cut too short so it looks like a buzz cut the morning after a party. I found his name and set my hand on the top, and it was warm from a tiny blink of sun between clouds. I said the thing I should have said, and then I came back to my life. At Greyfriars, the dust comes and goes with the weather. The council will tell you it's nothing, and the tour guides will tell you it's everything, and the truth of it sits somewhere it can breathe without explaining itself. On some nights at the slab, there's nothing but grit and someone else's name blunted by a century and my boots going steady. On others, there is the faintest print of fingers, as if a child tested the surface to see if it would take a mark. I stand a little way off with my hands in my pockets and my radio up. I do not write my name, and I do not wipe anything away. When I leave, I hang my keys and initial my times and go home to my flat and sleep like a person who knows what rhythm his name makes and how many knocks it takes to remind him. You want the part with the evidence. It always comes to that. A story is a thing made, a pattern drawn in dust. This is what I can give you. The photo of the glove with the handprint in the palm, the video that deletes and returns on nights when the air is still, the towel in the bin in my bathroom, gray smudged across white like somebody clutched it with both hands. The way my radio crackles 3 then 2 when I pass the black mausoleum if I say rest under my breath. The breath itself on the back of my neck sometimes, the one you would explain as wind if you were lucky. Moira retired this spring. She brought a plastic cake fork and paper plates on her last night, and we stood in the office and ate supermarket sponge with jam in the middle. I told her about the village and she nodded like someone listening to a bus timetable. Before she left at 4, she said, "You did right not to wipe it after." I asked what after meant and she put her hand on my shoulder like a bird landing. "Whatever it is," she said, "it's not finished with you. Doesn't mean it wants you gone. Sometimes it just wants to see you keep standing. Sometimes when the city goes quiet and the fox cuts a line between stone and shadow, I believe her. Sometimes I think the yard is a mouth that learns your name the way a song does and hums it to itself so it doesn't forget you. Sometimes I think it could have been any slab, any dust, any person with a glove who moved at the wrong time like a hand on a Ouija board. I keep walking. I keep my voice normal when I check the gates. I keep my hands to myself. The stone keeps its own counsel. Last week, after a stretch of rain, the dust was gone. The slab was slick dark. I passed without looking and then I turned back because that's who I am now. In the clean wet, I saw nothing written, and then as I stood, a shape rose in the sheen the way you see your face in a window at night. A handprint. The exact size of mine. It faded as I watched, as if someone on the other side pressed back and then let go, leaving warmth for a second on the skin of the world. I went home and slept 4 hours straight. In the morning, there was grit on my pillow, and when I shook it out over the sink, it made a sound like soft rain. I brushed it into my hand, and it left lines, and for a moment it looked like a map, and for a moment it looked like a name, and for a moment it was only dust. I washed my hands, and the water showed me how much of it can run and leave the rest behind. I don't go to the slab to make meaning anymore. I go because it's on my loop, and my loop is what I keep. If something wants me to rest, it'll have to ask without writing. If I write back, it'll be by standing where I am. That's the only language I've got that doesn't smear. I live in Savannah, a few miles from Bonaventure, in one of those old upstairs rentals where the paint always peels faster than you can plan for it. My street is narrow and quiet and leans a little toward the river. Like every building agrees the water is in charge. I grew up here. I bike to work. I know which gas stations sell the softest ice. I know where the shade falls at noon. And I know that Bonaventure is not really a place you visit once. You pass through it over the years. Funerals. Walks when the air feels kind, the kind of dates where you pretend you don't hear the bug zapper 2 blocks away. The cemetery slides in and out of your life until you forget you ever thought of it as separate. I do maintenance around town. Handyman stuff. I pressure wash porches, fix storm doors, change out light fixtures for retirees who don't want to climb ladders anymore. In spring and summer, I pick up extra work mowing and edging along the bluff by Bonaventure for a guy named Harlan, who has the city contract. It's not glamorous, but it puts cash in my pocket, and the view of the river makes the sweat worth it on most mornings. Bonaventure is not spooky the way people who don't live here think it is. It's beautiful. The oaks are old and polite. The Spanish moss hangs like someone draped the world in soft towels, and there are pockets of the place where the wind never seems to get lost. There's a bench near the water, down past the Mercer plot and the white angels everybody photographs, where the bluff dips and the river throws its light up at you. You can sit there and feel like you're in the front row of Savannah itself. People leave flowers there sometimes, little notes tucked under stones. On weekends, there are always coins. This is not a story about the first time I noticed the 3 coins stacked on that bench. That detail is so ordinary it feels made up even before anything happens. I noticed them years back and never thought about it beyond the basics. Tourists leave coins on graves all the time. People stack them like little offerings or for luck. Sometimes I'd see a kid counting out pennies, concentrating like it was schoolwork. Sometimes the coins would be nickels, sometimes dimes and quarters. There was no pattern I could see except that there were always 3, and they were always stacked neat, one on top of the other, dead center on the bench slat closest to the river, like the bench wore a tiny metal hat. When you work for Harlan, you take your breaks wherever shade happens to be. I'd sit on that bench at mid-morning when the sun was still deciding how mean to be. I'd drink half my Gatorade in one go, and then I'd move the stack carefully to the other end of the bench so I could lean back. I don't like sitting on top of things people leave, even coins. I'd finish my drink, put the 3 back where I found them, and get on with my day. That was my ritual if I had one. I didn't think about where the coins came from. I didn't think about whether they were the same 3. Savannah is like that. There's a hum of people leaving small tokens all the time. It becomes part of the air. The thing that shifted it from harmless into mine happened late August, a Tuesday. It was one of those days where nothing dramatic goes wrong, but every small thing turns sideways. My bike chain snapped on Victory. A client forgot to leave the gate open, and I had to set my ladder in a flower bed and feel guilty about it. Harlan called mid-afternoon and asked if I could do an extra pass by the bluff, because some folks from out of town had taken wedding pictures and dragged half the riverbank up onto the path with their trains. I went back out with a trimmer and 2 contractor bags and spent an hour picking up ribbons and little plastic pearls that pretend to be biodegradable. When I finished, I was mad at strangers and sweaty in a specific way that makes your socks argue with your toes. I sat at the bench. The coins were there, 3 high, nicked around the edges, the top one a quarter with someone's teeth marks on it from who knows when. I didn't move them first. I sat on the far end like a polite guest and stared at the water. The tide was pushing upriver, and the light was doing that trick where it looks like the current has scales. I don't know why I did it, but I reached over and slid the stack toward me, broke it apart, and put the coins in my pocket. I told myself I'd bring them back tomorrow and put them back exactly. It wasn't about the money. 3 coins aren't going to change your gas gauge. It felt like I was borrowing something from a place I considered half mine anyway. I don't know if that makes sense. I just know that at that moment the idea of leaving them there irritated me, like I wanted to call time out on the tiny superstition the city had created for itself. It had been a long day, and I needed something to let me feel in charge of a corner of it. That's the best reason I can give. It isn't a good one. By the time I got home, I'd forgotten about them. I made a late sandwich and took a shower, the kind where you stand under the water and think about nothing. And then I fell into bed with the fan on high. My phone said 12:19 when I rolled over the first time, 2:47 when I looked again, and then I felt like I'd been asleep for 10 seconds when a noise woke me up cold and alert, like I'd been dropped in a different room. It was the sound of coins hitting old wood, not a jingle, not a steady pour like when you dump your change out after a trip. 3 distinct clinks in a row with the little pause a hand makes between letting go and letting go again. My whole house talks all night, so I know 100 different versions of my floors and the house next door and the air conditioner vent deciding to sigh. This was not that. This was metal on wood in my bedroom at the foot of my bed in the dark, and my phone said 3:13 when I picked it up, because my hand went there before my brain. I didn't do the thing where you lie there and convince yourself it's nothing. I clicked my lamp and sat up and looked down, and there they were, my 3 coins. The same scuffed quarter and a nickel and a penny, the quarter on top because I had stacked them back at the bench to feel the only control I was going to get that day. They weren't stacked now. They were resting 3 inches apart like someone had dropped them one by one in a straight line to lead me toward the door. The line ended at my bedroom threshold, and the last coin touched the crack where the hall floor runs the other way. I got out of bed, and every board that could complain did, and I stood there staring like it was a magic trick and I should be able to see the trap. I touched the quarter with my bare foot, and it was cold. Not room temperature, not cooled off in the night cold like a doorknob can be, but river cold. There is a difference. If you're from here, you know it. There's a smell to it too, brackish like metal and salt and leaves that don't find land. The smell was faint, almost like my brain added it, but it was there. I picked them up. I said out loud, "Okay," to an empty room like I was acknowledging a deal I hadn't meant to make. I put the coins on my dresser far from the edge, one on top of another, and turned the lamp off. I didn't really sleep after that. I waited for the second part and it didn't come. The fan made its circle sounds and a car grumbled past and the room slowly traded black for gray, and then gray for that watery color the first sun gets when it talks through curtains. I was at the bench by 7. The air hadn't turned mean yet. There was a couple taking pictures and a jogger with a dog that looked like it could write checks. The 3 coins were stacked on the bench exactly where they always were. I stood there with my 3 coins in my pocket and looked down at the 3 sitting there like they had always been mine. It was dumb to feel that way, but that's what I felt. I reached into my pocket, took out my 3, and put them down on the other end of the bench. 6 in total now. The stack by the river sat steady. The ones I'd set down looked embarrassed, like I'd brought the wrong dish to a potluck. Harlan walked up behind me to talk about ours, and I flinched hard enough to make him laugh. "You all right, sport?" "I slept weird," I said. "Hey, you ever notice the coins?" "People been leaving coins out here since before I was born," he said. He's 62 and knows the shape of every tree that has ever shaded him. Mostly kids. Sometimes folks who lost somebody. My cousin says it started after one of those tour guides told a story about paying the ferryman. But you know how tour guides are. If you don't give them a ghost, they make one. We worked. I cut along the edge of the path. Harlan trimmed low where the machines won't go. We went around the white marble like we were putting a clean collar on the place. Every pass by the bench, I expected the extra 3 to be gone. They stayed there, unimportant and completely wrong. I told Danny that afternoon. She bartends on River Street and knows every rumor in this town before it does. We've been friends since high school because neither of us left. I met her on her smoke break and squinted up at the sky like I was waiting for a weather change. "I think something followed me home from the cemetery," I said. And then I told her about the clink at 3:13 and the coins on my floor in the cold. She made a face like she was trying to bite a smile. "You don't prank easy," she said. "So either you're telling me a ghost story because you want to see what I'll look like, or you took something you shouldn't have." "I put them back," I said. She flicked ash and flicked me a look. "No, you returned the idea of them," she said. There's a difference. I didn't ask what she meant because I already knew. I had taken the 3 that were mine in that annoying way possession finds you, and I had not put those exact 3 back where they wanted to be. So before dusk, I rode out and placed my 3 on top of the stack already there, and adjusted them so they made one pile again. It looked ridiculous and exact. I stood there waiting for some feeling to roll over me. Nothing did. The air moved, the river did what it always does. A tugboat pushed something heavy by like it was explaining a point, and the sun remembered it had somewhere else to be. That night at 3:13, 3 coins clinked onto my bedroom floor again. It was the same sound and a different pattern. This time I was awake for it, lying there with my back hot from the fan and my eyes closed. I heard the first clink and rolled over and turned on the lamp and watched the next 2 fall. I didn't see a hand. I didn't see anything. The coins appeared at knee height and dropped like a little invisible kid was bored in seeing how many times he could hit the same spot. Clink, clink. They landed exactly at the edge of my rug and then rolled outward until the floorboards told them they couldn't. I stood up and stared, and at some point started laughing because the laugh felt like it belonged to someone who could handle this, and I wanted to be that person even if I was borrowing him. I got a glass jar from the kitchen, the one my mom used to keep buttons in, and I put the coins inside and screwed the lid down tight. I carried the jar back to the bedroom and placed it in the center of the dresser. For some reason, I set it on a folded towel like people do with hotel ice buckets. I turned off the light. I lay down. My phone said 3:19. I stayed awake for 20 minutes waiting for the jar to rattle. It didn't. The house breathed and the air became water again, and I fell asleep on my side with the fan marking time. When I woke up, the jar was where I'd left it, the lid on, the towel crease still neat. There were no coins inside. The towel was damp underneath the jar in a circle, like something had sweated without a body to do the work. When I looked down at the floor, 3 coins were stacked at the leg of my bed. The top one had a thin, wet ring around it that evaporated while I stared. I wanted to be angry, and there's no way to aim that kind of anger. It ended up sitting in my chest like a second pulse. I did what I should have done the first night. I took the coins back to the bench the moment I could. I set them on the wood like I was returning a tool to a neighbor I'd accidentally kept for 2 weeks. I stood there with my hands on my hips and hoped someone watching would understand the posture. I said quietly, "Okay, they go here." I felt stupid and then slightly less stupid, and then, as I turned to go, I noticed something I hadn't before. On the underside of the bench slab, there were 3 dark ovals rubbed smooth into the grain. How long had people been putting coins here for it to wear the wood like that? How long had the wood been leaning toward them? I reached underneath and ran my fingers across the marks. They were not sticky or damp or anything a movie would show you if it wanted you to buy the ticket again. They were just there, shaped by patience. You know how this goes by now. The next night, the coins clinked onto my bedroom floor at 3:13 again, and the night after that, and the night after that. Some nights they appeared by the door, some nights by the window, once on my kitchen counter beside the sink while I was brushing my teeth and trying to pretend I cared about dental health more than the way my house had started scheduling my fear. Sometimes they were cold, sometimes they were just coins. I tried different things. I left my windows open to see if air was playing with me, then closed everything to make the house a sealed jar. I put salt around the dresser for a reason I couldn't defend. I taped my phone to a chair and recorded all night and caught nothing but a moth interrogating the lamp. I wore myself thin. Danny came over on a Friday and sat on my bed at 3:09 with a mug of coffee like a little exorcist. She said if we were going to be haunted, we could at least have the decency to be awake for it. When the coins fell, she didn't scream or joke. She leaned forward and watched them hit quarter, nickel, penny, that order, and then she took my hand and squeezed hard. We sat there like we were waiting out a storm. When it ended, she said quietly, "It isn't teasing you. It's reminding you of where you're supposed to be." "Where is that?" I said, even though I knew. "At the bench," she said. "At the water. You don't have to like it." The next day, I found Harlan by the truck and asked him if he'd ever heard anything specific about those coins. He wiped his hands on a rag that would never be clean again and looked past me at the river. "My mama used to talk about those Sea Island storms," he said, which is what old Savannahans sometimes call hurricane seasons. Said in the old days, folks used to leave coins near the water when they wanted a promise kept. You know how people toss pennies in fountains and make a wish? Country version is, you stack 3 near a moving thing and you say what you need without saying it out loud. The first coin is you, the second is the person or the thing you think you're owed, the third is time. Mama said if you mess with someone else's stack, you get on their clock a while. "Whose clock?" I said. "Does it matter?" he said. That evening I sat at the bench until the sky turned the color of a bruise that would heal and a breeze came off the river, and I could admit I was scared without it making anything worse. I stacked 3 coins of my own and said nothing, and hoped that counted as a kind of apology. There were already 3 sitting there. I didn't touch them. The wood under me felt warmer than it should for how the air had changed. At 3:13 the next morning, I got dressed and biked out to Bonaventure. The streets were empty in that way that makes you think the city is practicing how it would look without you. I slid past the gate and down the path with my phone light pointed at the ground so I didn't blind myself. The river made it sound like someone far away sweeping a floor. I have been down there at every hour there is, and I will tell you there is a difference to it when nobody else is listening. I sat on the bench. I placed my hands on my knees because I didn't trust them near the stack. I watched the black water forget and remember itself as it moved. The coins didn't clink next to my bed that night. They clinked on the bench, 3 neat taps without a body to hang the sound on. I felt the wood change under me like someone had sat down on the empty end of the bench and wanted to see if I'd notice. I didn't run. I didn't look to the side. I kept my eyes on the little stack in front of me and counted to 60. On 57, a small wake rolled up against the bank and died, as if a boat had passed without bothering to bring its light with it. When I stood, the top coin was different. It had been a quarter. It was a different quarter, worn smooth along Washington's head like someone had carried it for years and rubbed it when they were thinking. I didn't know that coin. I put my palm on the bench slat above it and thought about all the hands that had, over however many seasons, made the wood remember them. The bench did not feel cold. It felt like a place that had decided I would behave. I wish I could tell you that fixed it. It did not. For weeks afterward, the coins came home at 3:13 anyway. Not every night, but enough that I learned to sleep with a little thread tied around the fact of it. Sometimes nothing happened for 4 nights and I'd think, okay, That part of my life is over. And then I'd hear the small 3-note song of metal and feel stupid for thinking a schedule had anything to do with it. I started keeping a little dish by the door. When I woke to find the coins in the hall or at the threshold, I'd put them in the dish, go back to sleep if I could, and take them to the bench after breakfast. It felt less like I'd stolen something and more like I'd signed up for an errand that no one else wanted. Danny came out with me once on a Monday morning when she'd gotten off the late shift and the town felt empty and grateful. We sat and drank coffee that had given up and watched a heron decide whether our company was worth yelling about. The coins were there and I put mine beside them and scooted the 2 stacks together like 2 people who were going to be friends because their mothers had decided they would. Danny said, "Do you ever wonder what started it?" "Every day," I said. "I asked one of the old guides," she said. Told him I had a customer who wanted to know the story behind the coins. He said the story changes depending on who needs it. He said once there was a woman who waited on this bench for news and never got any. He said once there was a kid who promised to save up 3 coins and go north and didn't. He said once there was a boat that rang its bell 3 times between the bluff and the bend and never rang again. He said none of it matters as much as the stack. "I don't like that answer," I said. "Me either," she said. "But it's true. There were small things after that. Once I found a wet ring on my dresser where no cup had sat. Once I woke with a coin on my pillow and my teeth felt like I'd dreamed about biting something cold. Once I got into my car at lunch and 3 coins were stacked in the cup holder, balanced on the plastic like they had no right to be able to, and I laughed and cried in the same breath and felt like the river was borrowing my face for a second. Every time I took them back, if I couldn't make it to the bench, I would leave them on the sill facing the water and hope it counted. The coins stayed where I put them when I acted like I knew the rules. The last night it happened in a way that felt like an ending. Danny was the one who heard it first. We were on the phone late because she wanted to talk about getting a different job, and I was an easy voice to use while walking home. I'm not proud of it, but I had started sleeping with the bedroom door open so the sound could find me faster. Waiting through silence felt worse. At 3:13 the line went quiet and I said her name and she whispered, "I hear it on my side too." She was on a block near the river, and through her phone I heard 3 taps like someone at knee height was knocking on a door only they could see. In my room, 3 coins fell at the same time onto the hallway runner. I stood there with the phone pressed to my ear and the feeling that the city was talking to itself through me and my friend. And I said, "Okay." And I meant it in the way you mean it when something larger than you is being announced and your job is simply to make space. In the morning I walked the coins to the bench and stacked them the way the wood has asked to be remembered. There was already a stack there, and someone had tucked a folded piece of paper under it, not a note with a name, just a blank scrap like a placeholder. I didn't lift the coins to see what was written. I put mine beside the others and sat. The river was going out and the light moved on the underside of leaves. Somewhere far off, someone hammered a nail into something that wanted to be a house. The bench did what benches do when they are asked to keep their balance between the living and the part of town where talk is less useful. If you go to Bonaventure and sit by the water, you'll see the 3 coins. You'll watch a kid take them and a grandmother put them back and a teenager stack them very carefully, because he is not ready to imagine a consequence and he respects the idea that he might be wrong. You'll feel the river making itself again right in front of you whether you want it to or not. If you're like me, if the city has your bones in it, you'll hear metal touch wood some night when the hour has stopped dignifying itself with a number and you'll decide what kind of person you are. I was the kind who pretended I was borrowing. I am the kind who returns. I've made peace with the errand. Most nights I sleep straight through. Some nights my house reminds me what time it is. The coins clink in the hall and I say, "Okay," and I put them in the dish by the door and I bring them to the bench when the world becomes a place for walking again. On my dresser there is a faint circle nobody else would notice. If you run your hand over it, you can't feel a difference because wood doesn't give away that easy. But it's there if you look in the right light like everything else that lasts in this town. You learn where to stand and you learn when not to touch. And you learn that certain stacks were made before you. And your best work is to put them back where they go and keep moving. I didn't go to Paris looking for ghosts. I went because my girlfriend Lena had a conference and I tagged along like a cheap second suitcase. We booked a tiny studio near Gambetta, the kind with a bed that folded out of the wall and a shower you had to climb into sidelong. The first night we bought baguettes and cheap wine and wandered until our feet hurt. By the second day we had done the river, the bookstalls, the big church everyone photographs from the same angle. It felt like we were doing what tourists are meant to do, checking boxes, collecting stickers on a mental suitcase. On the third day after Lena's sessions, we walked uphill to Père Lachaise because I wanted a quieter place to shoot video. I make simple travel clips for friends and family, and sometimes for the tiny YouTube channel I keep private. Nothing fancy, just handheld shots and the kind of editing any laptop can handle. Cemeteries have that slow, steady movement I like for B-roll. Trees, stone, people speaking softly, wind with a personality. We went around 4 in the afternoon. A soft rain had swept through earlier and left everything rinsed and darker. The old lanes were shiny in the low light, and the crows sounded like they were complaining about the weather. There was a map board near the entrance with names that made the place feel like a museum. We wandered without a plan. Lena read the names out loud and made me guess who they were. I got a few, missed most. The part I can point to, the moment I can rewind in my head and say this is where it changed, was on a narrow path lined with private family crypts. They looked like tiny stone rooms pressed shoulder to shoulder, each with a door. Some doors were plain iron, some had rusted keyholes like little mouths, and a few had stained glass windows built into them, tall and narrow like a church's side eyes. The glass was old in that way you can't fake. It didn't just show color. It showed time. Dust lived inside it. I was filming the way I always film. Slow pan, tripod stance without a tripod, elbows in. Lena had stepped back to look at the moss on a roofline. I remember hearing her sniff because her nose was cold. I remember my hands feeling dry on the phone case. I framed the door with the stained glass and moved in close. The camera app showed my live view. It was just me, my shoulders in a dark jacket, the smear of leaves behind me, and the glass throwing back a greenish version of me. I exhaled and the glass bloomed a small wash of fog, then cleared. Nothing strange happened then. It was quiet. I took maybe 10 seconds of steady footage, then a few stills. I said something like, "Okay, got it." Lena said we should head back before the guards started clearing people out for closing. We walked on. The worst thing in my mind at that point was whether my sweater was too thin for the breeze. We ate at a small place that put their chalkboard menu on a chair outside the door. Lena talked about a data visualization panel from her conference. I talked about color grading and how Paris made everything look like it had been slightly overexposed and then corrected by someone with taste. Back at the apartment, I airdropped the clips to my laptop, and because I'm particular, I skimmed the day's footage right away to see if anything was worth keeping. When I got to the cemetery clip, the one of the stained glass door, I saw something I could not have seen there in the moment. It sounds like a trick of memory, but I need you to believe this part was clean. In the live view at the time, I was alone. In the saved video, there was someone standing beside me. Not exactly shoulder to shoulder, but close enough to read us together. You know, when two people stand near a mirror and their backs line up and you get that sense of a shared space. It looked like that. The figure's outline was faint, like reflections stacked in a shop window at night, but it was there. And it mirrored my posture with a lag. A half beat late. I breathed out. It breathed out. My shoulders dropped. Its shoulders dropped as if my movement spilled over and reached it afterward. I scrubbed back and forth. I toggled the audio up. There was wind in the trees and a bus murmur from the road in my breath. Then under that, soft as a throat clearing across a room, a whisper. 3 letters if you speak French, rest, stay. It didn't belong to me or Lena. It didn't match the rhythm of the wind. It rode under my voice like a small boat sliding under a bridge. I said Lena's name. She answered from the bathroom, toothbrush in, voice blurred. I asked, "Did you stand with me in the cemetery at the stained glass door?" She said no. She also said to stop watching creepy stuff before bed. I played the clip again anyway, and this time I watched the reflections breathing. If you've ever worked with audio, you know what it looks like when 2 tracks are almost in sync but one drifts. The way the waves nearly kiss but don't. Watching that reflection do what I did a fraction late made my stomach drop. Your body knows when 2 things that should match are out of step. It is the small wrongness that makes big fear. I boosted the sound in a simple editor. The whisper pulled forward, but when you amplify something that faint, you bring up everything else too. The room filled with a hum that might have been refrigerator, laptop fan, city noise. In that noise, the word got grainy, but it was still there. Rest. I tried not to make a face like I just tasted something sour so Lena wouldn't come out and see me being weird. I exported a copy for myself anyway. We slept. I woke before dawn to the city practicing being quiet. My phone had done its usual nighttime organizing by the time I looked. The Photos app had made a little memory of our day and tagged locations like it always does. When I tapped the cemetery clip, I expected to see the pin near one of the lanes outside the family crypts. Instead, the map label said inside. Not inside the cemetery. Inside. A radius tight enough that the blue dot sat right on top of the stained glass door itself, as if the phone believed it had been recorded from the interior of the crypt looking out. If this had happened back home, I would have told myself it was a software quirk and moved on. Being in a city where I was already thinking in 2 languages made it stranger. Inside what? Inside who? I checked our other photos. The ones near the entrance tagged fine. The cafe tagged fine. Only that clip insisted on inside. I turned location off and on. I hard closed the app. The label stayed. By breakfast, I had decided I needed a normal explanation. Distorted reflections, old glass, GPS weirdness among stone and iron, a whisper that could be my brain picking out a word from noise because I fed it the expectation of a word. The mind does that. It is a machine that prefers patterns to blankness. We went about our day. Lena had a half schedule, so I played solo tourist and texted her pictures of things I thought she would like. At a crosswalk on Boulevard de Ménilmontant, I drifted close to a shop window while I waited and watched my reflection among the mannequins. Other reflections slid in and out. The city's analog augmented reality. I lifted my phone to take a quick clip for a transition. My reflection raised its phone. A woman moved past and her scarf flashed. I dropped my phone hand and for the slice of a moment before my reflection caught up, I saw it still holding a phone at eye level. Not a big lag, just enough to feel it in the chest. I laughed too sharply, a single bark. A guy beside me glanced over like he was deciding whether to step away. The crosswalk went green. I crossed. I told myself it was a trick of the angle. When I met Lena later near a metro entrance, I pointed at the reflective panel and said, "Tell me this looks normal." We stood side by side. I raised my hand. She raised hers. The reflections raised theirs a heartbeat late. She said, "It's glass on top of polished metal. There's a lag because you're moving. It's fine." She was right to say it and I was wrong to feel my mouth go dry anyway. That night I opened the clip again because normal people prod a bruise to see if it still hurts. This time something else changed. The audio I had exported with the boosted whisper had a timestamp different from the original by several minutes. I checked the system clock. I checked the metadata. It said the boosted file had been created 2 minutes after a minute it also said didn't exist, like there was a missing rung in a ladder. The location label still said inside. I took screenshots. I emailed them to myself like evidence you'd send a lawyer. Sleep went light. In the middle of the night, I woke to the click of the apartment's water heater and lay listening. That city apartment quiet carries a heavy texture if you let it. The whisper of tires on wet pavement. A neighbor's toilet. Somewhere a TV. When I finally drifted again, I dreamed I was filming the stained glass from the other side. The light coming through was thin and green. The iron bars that held the glass together felt cold where my palm rested. I exhaled and the fog bloomed and delayed just like in the clip, except this time the delay belonged to me. I could see my own breath on the inside of the glass. I woke with a start, hand up, palm open to the ceiling. Lena mumbled and rolled closer. In the morning, there was red grit under my nails, not much. Just the kind of dust you get if you drag your hand across old brick or rusted iron. The apartment had white walls, clean as a rental. The only place I had touched anything like that had been the cemetery. I washed and didn't say anything. Taking something from a graveyard is bad luck, I thought. I hadn't taken anything. The thought didn't care. By afternoon, I had talked myself into going back. Not for a thrill. For proof that the normal world still held. Lena said she was going to meet a colleague near Bastille. I told her I wanted more footage because the light had been pretty. We agreed to meet later by the river. I walked up the hill into the cemetery air that smells older than regular air. I followed our path by memory. I recognized the chipped cornice, the cracked tile on a doorstep, the way a cedar slumped over a wall like it had been drinking. The lane was the same. The stained glass was the same. The slow, polite quiet of the place settled around me. A man passed with a small bouquet wrapped in paper and nodded. I nodded back, suddenly aware of how alone you can feel in a place full of names. I held my phone the same way. I pressed record. I leaned close enough to see the tiny trapped bubbles in the old glass like stars caught in syrup. My reflection looked back. The delay wasn't there at first. Or maybe it was there and I didn't feel it yet. I breathed out. No fog because I was outside and the day had warmed. Then from the other side, an echo of fog blooming on the glass as if someone inside had breathed too. A beat late. Not much. Just enough to lift the hair on my arms. I stepped back. The fog cleared from within. A faint sound came from behind the door, the kind iron makes when it settles against stone. I told myself the hinge was cooling. The guard had oiled it. Heat shifts, metal answers. I could have left then. That is the point in the story where the sensible person props the door of their life open and walks through it. Instead, I said quietly to nobody, "Okay, you win." I put my palm flat against the glass because in the dream that had been the position, and I wanted to prove the dream wrong. Cold came through like water. On the inside, a matching palm print spread and pressed and held mine a fraction late. My breath snagged. I lifted my hand away. The inside print stayed for a beat and then faded. I did not hear the whisper with my ears. I felt it in my chest first, like a pressure change in an airplane. When it reached the part of me that hears, it was a word I already knew. Rest. If you haven't been to Père Lachaise, the stone lanes can curve and return you to where you started without you meaning them to. I stepped back from the door and nearly tripped over a raised slab. I walked with the deliberate speed of someone not running. I turned left, right, down a stair that might have been the wrong stair. The hills fold you there. I told myself to aim for the main path and find other people. The lanes shrugged that off and gave me smaller, more private choices instead. When the guard's whistle blew from far off, the sound was kind and too thin to attach a direction to. I looked at the map board posted at an intersection of names and felt the particular embarrassment of being lost in front of the dead. I found the wide path eventually. A couple held hands and passed me. The guard's whistle blew again, closer, and a voice called in a way that was language without being a sentence I understood. I answered with my hand and my smile and the pace of my feet. At the gate, the world clicked. The street noise embraced the edges. I made it 2 blocks before I stopped and leaned against a wall and let my body do the shaking it had deferred. I told Lena. Everything in a slimmed-down version that made me sound more like a person and less like a problem. She listened with her head tilted. When I said the thing about the inside breath fogging the glass, she touched my wrist like you do when you don't want to say you're worried. She asked if I wanted to leave the city early. I said no. I said I was fine. People say fine when they want to stay in the story and also end it. That night, I put the phone on the table like it was a sleeping animal I didn't want to wake. We ate leftovers and watched a panel show with captions. We laughed at jokes slowly like they had to cross a border. Near midnight, while Lena brushed her teeth, my phone vibrated twice with no visible notification. The screen lit, then went dark. When I picked it up, the cemetery clip was open like it had been waiting behind everything else. The location label did not say inside anymore. It said something that translated to within. I know that sounds like a small shift, but it didn't feel small. Inside is a place. Within is a direction. I did the thing you're not supposed to do when you're already afraid. I played it again with the sound up. In the space under my breath and the wind, there were the sounds you don't notice until you hear them and then can't forget. A small scrape, a slight thud like someone moving a foot on a stone floor. The whisper rose so gently I almost missed it at first. Reste ici. Stay here. We flew home 2 days later. Airports make everything feel like it has been processed and sealed, so I let that carry me. On the plane, I watched a dumb movie and pretended to sleep. Lena scrolled through photos and made a joke about how many pictures I take of corners. By the time we stood in our kitchen and let the quiet of our own place find its shape around us, the city felt like a story we told each other to stay close. Then, the first morning back, the clip auto-generated a new memory in my Photos app all by itself. It didn't pull from other videos. It didn't pair the cemetery with the river or our dinner. It was just that clip, set to a default track I hadn't been using lately. The location label said inside again. The map pin sat like a period at the end of a sentence at that same address, that same door. I checked the metadata for the 100th time. The phone thought the clip had been created a meter inside a building my body had never entered. I got stubborn. I told myself I would delete the clip and be done. I held my thumb on it until the trash icon appeared. When I tapped, The screen froze and then slid me back to the beginning of the camera roll like it was a deck shuffling itself. The clip was still there. I exported it to my laptop like a person making a backup of a confession. On the laptop, the created date nudged by a minute that didn't line up with anything in my timeline. It put itself just after a timestamp I spent 10 minutes scrolling for and couldn't find. The minute didn't exist, but the file insisted it did. 3 days later, standing at our bathroom mirror, I saw my reflection reach for the water a fraction after I did. And then in the blur of the faucet stream, I saw the version of me in the glass fail to follow one small movement. My real hand went to the left for the soap. The mirror hand stayed at the knob like it had forgotten its cue. If you've never seen your own face lose your place by a second, I'm happy for you. You can feel your heart begin to count differently. I stood there watching the mirror catch up. When it did, I laughed because the other choice was to shout. That day I found a tiny triangle of blue glass in the pocket of the jacket I had worn in Paris. It was so small it could have been a pebble of hardened sugar. I don't collect souvenirs like that. I don't pocket things from graves. The sight of it made me lightheaded. I wrapped it in tissue and put it in a drawer and then took it back out and wrapped it tighter and put it farther back. Like distance matters inside a house. A week after that, Lena told me I was breathing funny at night. Not snoring, not sick. Just a pattern that was off. She said I would breathe out and then pause too long and then breathe in like I had needed a reminder. She nudged me once and said my name, and I took a breath like I had been waiting for a cue from someone else. She made a joke about me syncing with European time and I laughed. But the idea cut cleanly through me, because in the clip, the breath on the inside of the stained glass is always a beat late, because the thing that stood beside me was always catching up. I tried to be the kind of person who writes this down so I could look at the shape of it. I kept notes, timestamps, when the location label changed and when it didn't. Screenshots of the map pin sitting wrong on the world like a thumb pressed through paper. I told myself that if I could track it, I could understand it. If I understood it, I could stop it. The notebook made me feel like an investigator for exactly 1 day. Then I woke to find it open beside the bed when I was sure I had closed it. And on a page I hadn't reached yet, the word reste was written very small in the margin. And the smaller truth is that the handwriting looked like my own when I'm half asleep. I have not shown the clip to anyone else yet. Not the internet, not the forum where stories go to be doubted and believed in equal measure. I am writing this because I want to put the shape of it into other minds as a way of letting some of it out of mine. If you tell me to delete the clip, know that I have tried. If you tell me to smash the phone, know that I held it over a concrete floor and couldn't bring myself to let it go. I am not afraid of breaking a thing. I am afraid of what a broken thing might say. Last night, a storm came. I sat in the dark living room while Lena slept and watched the streetlight pour itself into the window. The glass made a second version of the room, and in that version, I saw myself sitting more still than I was, hands folded like someone in a portrait. I decided that if I saw the delay, I would count it. I would give it a number, and a number is smaller than a fear. I lifted my hand and waved once at the window. The man in the window lifted his hand and waved once, a beat late, and then kept his hand up after mine was down, palm open toward me like a request. My phone vibrated on the table. No alert on the lock screen, just the subtle buzz you feel more than hear. When I woke the screen, the cemetery clip had jumped up again. And for the first time, there was a small line of text under the location label, the way some apps offer suggestions. It said in English now, maybe because it knew what language I was thinking in. Open in maps? I pressed my thumb where the question mark was without meaning to, and the map opened. The pin was where it always is now, inside that door. Under the pin it said, "You are here." I turned the phone face down like that could turn off a fact. I sat very still. In the window, the other me didn't lower his hand. I got up because sitting felt like choosing, and I went to the drawer where I had wrapped the tiny blue triangle in tissue. I unwrapped it. In the storm light, the glass looked darker than it should have. It caught the lightning and held it for a breath and then let it go. I thought of how cold the inside of the stained glass had felt under my palm. I thought of the breath blooming and lagging. I thought of the word that had been a whisper first and then a direction. I put the glass down and closed the drawer and came back to the couch and wrote this. I am telling myself that stories have ends even if the things they are about don't. I am telling myself that there is a difference between inside and within and here and there. I will not go back to Paris, not in person. I will not open the clip again tonight. I will not press my hand to any glass. If you are reading this because you search for the kind of story that makes you feel watched and at least a little less alone, I want to give you something simple and useful, the way people post tips about hiking or home repair. Here it is. When you film something and your reflection answers a beat late, stop filming. When a word you didn't say rides under your voice and asks you to stay, leave. And if your phone ever tells you that you are somewhere your body hasn't been, do not go there to prove it wrong. Right now, as I finish this, my phone is face down and silent. The room is quiet in the way of houses that have learned your patterns. From our bedroom, I can hear Lena breathe steady as a clock. I match my breath to hers because it feels like a harbor. I hold it when she holds it. I release when she releases. For a time, the rhythm makes sense again. Then somewhere under the floorboards of the night, the other rhythm begins to tap. A small echo asking to be matched. A half beat late and patient. I will not answer it. I will not put my hand on the glass. I will not open the map, but I know where the pin is, and the label under it. And I know what the inside of that word feels like when it presses back against your palm. I'm not superstitious. I don't have a ghost story ready to pull out at parties, and I wasn't hunting for anything weird when I went to Koyasan. I wanted quiet. I wanted trees older than the country I was born in. A break from the neon and noise of Osaka, and maybe a night in a temple to reset my head. If I'm posting this at all, it's because I can't get what happened out of my mind, and because I have one piece of it in my desk drawer that I can't explain. This happened last autumn, late October, during that stretch when the air is just cold enough to sting your ears and smell like wood smoke. I booked a shukubo, one of those temple lodgings up on the mountain. You take the train to Gokurakubashi, cable car up, then a bus that winds past souvenir shops and cedar trunks thick as pillars. The place I stayed at was simple and clean. The monks served dinner early, vegetable dishes laid out like small, careful paintings, and told us morning prayers would be at 6. I shared a low table with a couple from Fukuoka and an Australian guy named Dan who had been hiking the Kumano Kodo and talked in the half-whisper people use when they feel like guests in someone else's house. After dinner, one of the younger monks who translated for us mentioned Okuno Inn. If you go, he said, bow at the bridge and stay on the marked path. No photographs at the inner area, please. Night is very quiet there. He didn't say don't go at night, just gave that small, polite smile that can mean anything in Japan. The couple from Fukuoka said they would go in the morning. Dan wanted to rest his knee. I can be stubborn about doing the thing I came to do, so I said I'd take a walk and be back early. Outside, the mountain already felt like it belonged to a different hour than the one shown on my phone. Mist lay along the road in slow-moving ribbons. Storefront shutters were down. The bus stop was empty except for a dog asleep on its paws under the bench. From the entrance near Ichinohashi, Okuno Inn starts as a stone path between weathered lanterns and cedar trees that make a ceiling with their branches. The air there has its own temperature. You can hear your breath and small sounds far away, like the bell from somewhere up the hill and the rustle of leaves. The first subtle thing was the way the lanterns lit. I don't mean sensor lights that pop on when you walk past. There are electric lines here and there, but a lot of the lanterns are old stone Toro with little windows cut in them. As I stepped under the cedars, the closest two were already glowing. I took a few steps and the next one down the path slid from dark to a soft, steady light, like someone had turned a dimmer. Another 4 steps and the next lantern came up. I told myself they were on a timer. They came on in order because the wiring was laid that way. Still, I caught myself pausing before walking forward, like I was being led onto the path one square at a time. The path itself is fine gravel set in shallow ridges. You can feel it through the soles of your shoes. Moss grows on everything that will hold still long enough. Stone railings, the little Jizo statues with knitted caps and red bibs, even the sides of the path. I passed offerings tucked into carved hands, coins, pebbles, a packet of candy with cartoon characters on it. One Jizo had a stack of smooth stones placed on his head, each one about the size of a small egg. The stones were wet. It wasn't raining. I looked up because I thought maybe the tree above was shedding mist like rain, but the branches were still. There were other people at first, 2 women walking together, then a man in a baseball cap with headphones. then a trio of students who hushed themselves when they realized they were among graves. We passed each other with nods. Everyone's footsteps make the same sound on that gravel. The further you go, the quieter the voices get, and the more your ears tune to things like the clacks of crows, the drip-drip from high up, the little bells some pilgrims wear. Somewhere between the first bridge and the turnoff for a newer area, the path took a subtle fork. The sign was simple, an arrow with kanji and an English line that said main approach. Under it, a smaller arrow pointed left, historic approach. I chose the historic one. It ran narrower, closer to the tombs. The lanterns here were older stone with lichen freckles and roofs like miniature pagodas. As I stepped, one lit, then the next. I kept moving, feeling watched in a way that didn't feel hostile, just particular, like being counted. I checked my phone for the time and saw the battery had dropped to 72%. That was odd. It had been in the 80s when I left the temple. I clicked the top button to darken the screen and heard something behind me that made me stop. It was another set of footsteps matching mine, that didn't belong to the women or the guy in the baseball cap. It had the faint, soft slap of sandals. It stopped when I stopped. I turned and saw only the line of lanterns and the path curving back into mist. Okay. People walk here all night. Maybe someone had stopped when I did, out of politeness. I started again slow, waiting to be passed. The steps started again too. They never overtook me. They never got closer or farther. When I stopped the second time, they stopped a beat later, like the person was distracted and didn't anticipate me. I called over my shoulder, "Sumimasen," without turning. No answer. I tried again, a little louder. The sandals stopped. When I turned this time, the lantern behind me dimmed. It didn't blink or flicker. It thinned like fog diffusing light, and then it was just stone. The lantern after that stayed lit. For maybe 2 heartbeats, I stood between a dark lantern and a lit one and felt like the ground under me wanted to tilt. I took 2 steps forward. The next lantern lit and the dark one behind me stayed dark. I took 2 more. Another light came up ahead.
Behind me, 1 more went out. No one tells you how loud your own breathing can sound when you finally notice it.
I tried to make mine quiet. I told myself again that there were timers. But this was wrong. The lighting wasn't a wave moving forward or a timed chain. It was responding. It was keeping a rhythm with me. I walked, and the distance between lit and unlit was always the same. 2 lanterns ahead, none behind. Everything else around me felt normal, which almost made it worse. A tiny shrine with a votive shelf stood on the left. There were coins on it. One was new and shiny enough that the orange light picked up its reflection and made a dot on the underside of the shelf, a small, bright bead of copper light. The moss on the nearby stones looked like kneaded felt. A crow barked like a small dog from somewhere high and unseen. I took out my phone to take a picture, then put it away. It felt wrong to capture it. But part of me also didn't want evidence that I would have to explain later to myself. There was another sign, Torodo Hall. Hall of Lanterns. I'd seen the photos online, rows and rows of lit lanterns inside a building like a honeycomb of light. It wasn't far now. The path dipped and then rose to a gate. That was when the footsteps I'd been hearing behind me did something different. They didn't stop when I stopped. They took 1 more step. It was a small step, the kind that carries you just within touching distance. The strap of my backpack tugged like somebody had picked it up with 2 fingers and let it down again. I turned so fast I kicked small gravel off the edge of the path. Behind me, the dark was thicker because the last 2 lanterns had gone out. Beyond them was just a line of cedar trunks and a deeper kind of dark that felt like it had a weight to it. My breath misted and hung and thinned. "I see you," I said, which was dumb because I didn't. I set my palm on my own strap. It was damp. That could have been mist. It had a smell to it, though, a sour smoke smell like a match blown out near your face. I squeezed the strap and felt a grain. Later, I would find a mark on it the size of an adult thumbprint, slightly darker than the rest of the fabric, like ash had been pressed into the weave. At the time, I only know I stood there and felt, with ugly certainty, that if I took 1 step backward, I would hook into something that could not unhook. A bell sounded from somewhere farther up. A long, steady note that you feel in your chest as much as you hear. It came as relief, the way a loud human-made sound does when you're alone in an old breathing place. And in the same flicker of thought, I realized that it also meant the hour was later than I'd planned. I started forward again because stopping felt like being prey. The lanterns did their slow brightening ahead, 2 by 2, guiding me up toward the gate. Okuno Inn's main gate at the inner area is simple in a way that's earned. You come up to it and you know you're supposed to be smaller. I paused just short of it and turned around, expecting to feel better from seeing the zigzag of lit lanterns stretching down behind me. There weren't any. The path behind me was a corridor of dark. It wasn't pitch black. The mist glowed a little from the light at my back. But every lantern behind me had gone out down to the first bend. The only glow was the one I stood in. I stepped back 2 paces because some part of me wanted to test a theory I hadn't known I had. Ahead, one more lantern came on, stretching the bright part forward. Behind, nothing changed. I took out my phone to use the flashlight. The screen showed 63% battery. I swiped over and turned the light on and aimed it at the gravel where my feet had just been. My footprints were clear, a broken line of ovals with little scalloped edges where the stones had shifted under my soles. They ran up toward me from the bend below. The last one was 20 steps away. I counted because I didn't want to be wrong. I counted the gaps between the prints because I didn't want to fool myself with big steps or double steps. 20. The cold went into my stomach like I had a mouth there that had swallowed ice. I was standing in a patch of clean, undisturbed gravel. There were faint marks here and there, little whisker lines from wind maybe, but not the ovals my shoes made. Then, where I stood, my shoes pressed their next print like the path had just learned I existed again. I stepped forward onto the next lantern's light. The pattern continued. Untouched gravel for 20 steps toward me, then prints. It was as if the past hadn't noticed me until I got here. I don't know how long I stood there with the light on my own feet, counting, then counting again, then stepping back to see if the prints would appear retroactively, like whatever mechanism was doing this lagged behind. They didn't. When I stepped back 1 pace, the print I'd made stayed, and there was a new gap behind it, 20, 21. I stepped forward again, and it corrected. 20. If this is where you think I turned around and ran, I didn't. I've read enough stories to know that movement can be a kind of consent. Also, I could hear people up beyond the gate. Not voices exactly. A cough, the soft directional noise of cloth moving against cloth, a handful of tiny bells. It sounded like a procession or a line of people shifting their weight. The human noises made everything inside me sit down. I turned off my phone light and stepped up through the gate. There were people there or something that made the pattern of people. Lanterns hung in rows under a roof ahead, and the light from them touched black shapes lined along the path beyond the gate. The shapes were men with staffs and women with shawls and children with hands clasped. They were as still as wet bark. A very old man stood a few paces inside the gate wearing white split-toe socks and brown wooden sandals. His head was shaved. He held a staff with small metal rings near the top that made sound when he breathed. "You are late," he said in English without looking at me. He was so slight I could see each rib of his umbrella through the cloth, though it wasn't raining. He didn't open the umbrella. He held it in the wrong way for that, by the ribs instead of the handle, resting them against his shoulder like a folded fan. I bowed. He didn't look like the monks from my lodging who wore gray and laughed when they explained things. He looked like the idea of a monk you'd draw if you were trying to be respectful and vague. I started to say sorry. He shook his head once without impatience. "Walk," he said. "Do not stop until you see me again." I stepped through and the shape of the lined-up people shifted slightly as if with a breeze, though there wasn't any. I kept my eyes down to the gravel. The lanterns here were not the old stone ones, but a soft field of small lights, thousands of them, and the hall ahead was real, not something projected by the fog. You could feel heat when you turned your hands toward it, the mild warmth of long-burning bulbs and bodies. I did what he said. I walked. I expected to reach the hall and the people and then, I don't know, fall into a normal scene that zinged everything I'd just felt into some explainable place. But the people didn't resolve when I got closer. They didn't become individual faces. Once in a while I'd think I caught a feature, a nose in profile, a loose tendril of hair. But when I tried to see the whole of them, they were like reflections in moving water. I kept walking. The chanting I'd heard as more of a pressure than a sound. Somewhere up there somebody was chanting, swelled as if I'd walked under something that funneled it down. My hands did something on their own. They unclasped, then moved toward each other, then stopped carefully short of a prayer gesture. I didn't want to mimic. I didn't want to fake anything because faking felt like a kind of lying that would be noticed immediately and punished without anger. I saw the old man again before I expected to. He was to the right of the path now, standing at the edge of a flat stone. A tree grew there that had been caged with a rough lattice to protect it, cedar within cedar. He inclined his head. I stopped because I'd been told to stop when I saw him again. He lifted his hand and did a small, crisp motion like he was flicking something off the edge of his palm. The bells on his staff answered that tiny movement with one click. "You came alone," he said. He didn't look accusing. It was a sentence like, "It is cold." "I'm staying at a temple," I said, because it felt like an explanation. I didn't mean to be rude. He tilted his head again to the other side. His eyes were not old, but the corners of them were. If you've ever had a teacher put your hand in the right place on an instrument, it felt like that. "Alone has weight," he said. "Tonight it is heavy." "I heard someone behind me," I said. I thought it was a person. I reached up to touch my backpack strap and stopped, not wanting to draw attention to the exact spot where something had touched me. "Yes." He didn't ask about it. "If you look back, you will lose count. If you lose count, you will stay." Some part of my brain that wasn't crumpled in fear wanted to ask, "Count what?" But the answer sat there like a knuckle pressing against my temple. The steps. The 20. The old man watched the idea show up in my face and nodded, as if at a slow student who had done the arithmetic. "When the bell sounds again, walk back. Do not look where you were. Look where you are going. You will see me at the bridge." When the bell sounded this time, I didn't flinch. It felt like a train sound when you're standing on a platform, heavy and full of arrival. I did exactly as I was told. I fixed my eyes on the lantern that would be after the next one, and when it bloomed to life, I fixed them on the one after that. I did not look down at my feet. I did not look at the gravel to see if I was real yet. The urge to do that was strong enough I had to talk to myself under my breath like you do when your body wants to do something that would make the situation much worse. Don't just walk. I'm not brave in a general way, but I can follow instructions. The chanting thinned into a thread behind me, and then into nothing, like the sound was something the mist could eat. I felt a pressure at my back twice, like a small child putting a hand on you to see if you will turn. I didn't turn. The light ahead lit in rhythm. When I reached the gate, I made myself look at a point slightly above the lintel, at a spider web strung between two easy-to-miss places, a cracked edge of wood and a nail head. And I made myself think the web's owner was still a real busy spider. I crossed under and the air changed, warmer by a narrow margin, as if that had been a boundary of temperature and not spirit. The old man waited where the dark started. He was exactly on the line where the last lit lantern had decided to commit. His staff's rings chimed once. "Walk," he said. "Do not run." The map in my mind of the path down didn't apply now. The darkness was different. It was friendly the way a closed eye is friendly. The trunk of a cedar is a friend when your body needs a shape to know where it is, and I felt several of them with the side of my forearm without stepping off the path. The gravel sound under my feet kept me company. After a while, I can't tell you the minutes, I started to hear another sound below the gravel, a less regular one. It was like water hitting stone in a place where you can't see the stream, but you know it's there because of the way the air tastes. My mouth tasted like a coin. I swallowed and the taste didn't go away. When the glow of the first of the older stone lanterns showed itself, it did it like a deliberate mercy. It didn't snap on. It breathed into being, and then its neighbor did. At the third one, I felt something angry at my hip that didn't belong to me. It was a quick heat, the sensation you get when someone touches a curling iron to the back of your hand by accident. It burned through my shirt and went away in the shape of a palm. I didn't make a sound because the shape felt listening. I was not brave at that moment. I was obedient. I walked. I didn't run. The bridge, when it came, was a relief so big it made my knees register the work they'd been doing. The old man stood at the far side. He put his palm up at shoulder height in a gesture I would have read as "stop anywhere in the world." I stopped. He moved the staff so that the rings whispered and then went still. For a second, he looked less like a person and more like a picture of one, like those old photos in museums where the exposure makes the subject's eyes go to smoke. Then he blinked and he was a person again. He took something from his sleeve, a small folded rectangle of off-white paper with black brushstrokes on it, and handed it to me across the low rail. "Carry this to your sleeping place," he said. "Put it above your head. In the morning, give it to me at the gate. Will you be here? I asked, because that was the kind of question I could manage. I have stood at this bridge for a long time, he said, which wasn't an answer but was the only one I was going to get. I bowed. He didn't return the bow. He inclined his head the slightest amount and reached out again, palm up, and tapped with one knuckle the strap of my backpack, where something had held me earlier. The tap made a dust of ash fall out of the fabric. Not much, the way a burned match leaves a gray ghost of itself when you flick it. He nodded once as if to say, "There." I walked back along the road to the lodging with the paper, Ofuda, I think it's called, cupped in my hand because I didn't want to bend it by putting it in my pocket. The dog was still asleep under the bench at the bus stop. The lights in the vending machines looked very modern and loud. Inside the hallway smelled like tatami and clean soap. I slid my door and set the paper above my pillow on the little wooden rail that runs along the wall. My hands shook, not dramatically, just enough that the paper corner trembled when I tucked it into place. I lay down and didn't sleep. The fear had gone out of me, and what replaced it wasn't calm. It was like when your leg falls asleep and then floods with pins and needles if you move. My thoughts were like that. If I moved them, 1,000 small pains started. In the morning, the bell for prayers woke everyone. I got up before it finished and checked the paper. It looked the same as last night except for a faint smear on the lower corner like someone had brushed it with a thumb that had touched soot. I hadn't done that, and I had set it where I would see if I had. I slid the door and stepped into the hall. Dan from Australia was there with a stiff gait and a smile like he'd slept hard. "How was it?" he said. "Creepy?" "Quiet," I said, which was both true and the kind of lie you tell when you don't want to infect someone with something. He nodded, satisfied. During breakfast, the couple from Fukuoka asked if we'd go to the morning fire ceremony. We did. It was beautiful and hot and normal in a way that made me want to cry, which I didn't, because you don't cry about normal things in front of strangers. After, I walked back toward Okuno Inn. I didn't mean to be dramatic, I didn't clutch the paper, but I didn't let it out of sight. I planned to go straight to the bridge. Halfway there, I realized I didn't know whether I would recognize the old man in daylight. My stomach made that small drop feeling you get on a sudden hill in a car. The bridge looked completely ordinary in the morning. People took photos of each other. A tour group with matching caps gathered near a guide who held up a small flag. The guide was talking about etiquette and the history of Kobo Daishi in careful, practiced English. I stood to one side and waited until there wasn't a knot of people crossing. Then I crossed and stopped at the spot where the old man had lifted his hand last night. There was no one there. I stood long enough that the guide finished his speech and moved on. The dog at the bus stop barked once and then lay back down. The sun made color where the moss had been all one shade last night. He wasn't there. I don't know how to describe the mix of disappointment and relief that went through me. It was like taking your hand away from a stove that isn't on and still feeling heat. I looked around not to prove he existed. I already had something in my other hand that did that. But to do what I said I would do, which was to return the paper. I didn't want to carry it away like a theft. A monk in gray, one I recognized from the lodging, walked by with 2 large bags of something that looked like vegetables. He nodded to me. I stepped toward him and did the small bow and held out the paper like a lost and found item. "I was told to give this back," I said, "to the monk at the bridge." He glanced at it politely, then sharply. His face changed in a way that wasn't dramatic, just more present. He set the bags down and smoothed the paper with 2 fingers, not touching the ink. "Who gave you this?" he said in Japanese first, then repeated in English for me. "The monk who stood here last night," I said. Small shaved head, white socks. He had a staff with rings. He told me to walk and not look back. The younger monk looked toward the middle distance as if that would help him translate inside his own head. "We do not stand here at night," he said. He didn't say it like a rule. He said it like a weather report. "Not now, maybe long time, before. Can I give it to you?" I said because holding it felt too large suddenly. He held up his palms and very gently didn't take it. "You keep," he said. "If he gave, you keep." He looked down again at the corner smear, then at the strap of my backpack, then back to my face. "You okay?" "Yes," I said. It was true in that moment. Everything about daylight was a net over my mind. He nodded once. "Be careful of night," he said, then picked up his bags and walked toward the hall. He didn't hurry, but there was a distance in his steps, like he was already somewhere else he needed to be. I walked the path again in the day, all the way to the inner area where photography isn't allowed. People moved like small boats in a harbor, each with their own slack line holding them to shore. The lanterns inside Toronto Hall were as beautiful as the pictures make them seem. There were thousands. The combined light felt like standing near a field of bees, but without the sound. I bowed where I had seen people bow. I put a coin into a box. I didn't try to count my steps. I didn't look for the spider web. I thought very carefully about nothing at all, which is not something I'm usually capable of. On the bus down later, I checked my health app out of habit because I like round numbers and wanted to see what the stairs and the hike had added. My steps for the night showed a bar with a strange gap, a dip. It wasn't missing minutes, there was no blank in the timeline. It was like a segment had been counted lightly or not at all, and then the count resumed, as if the phone had stopped understanding that the small movements of my hip mattered. The dip, if you measured the width with your finger, was about as long as 20 steps would take to walk at the careful speed I'd kept last night. I told myself it was a coincidence or the kind of stuff your mind does when it wants to attach a number to a feeling. Then I put the phone away. I was tired of data. Back home, the backpack strap dried and showed nothing unless you knew where to look. If you do, and I do, you can see the print. Not clean like ink, but like something burned very lightly. If you run 2 fingers over it, the weave is slightly rougher where the print is. That's not evidence anyone else would accept. Neither is the ofuda. It's just paper. It sits in my desk in the envelope the hotel gave me for my room key. The ink on it has bloomed out a hair the way old ink does. The smear on the corner is the exact gray of ash. If you put it to your nose and breathe in, there's a faint smell like an incense stick that was put out with a drop of water. I tell myself a lot of sensible things. Motion sensors exist. Lights can be on timers. Batteries drop faster in the cold. Health apps hiccup. Monks have schedules I don't understand. But when I think about turning around on that path and seeing the dark pressed right up behind me, and then I think about my own print stopping short by a number that stayed the same no matter what I did, the sensible things fold up like paper and tuck themselves into a sleeve. The part that keeps me from filing this away as a good story that I told myself too well is small and petty, like many true things are. 2 weeks after I got back, I dropped my backpack in my living room and went to take a shower. When I came back out, my apartment smelled faintly like a blown-out match. I checked the stove. Cold. I checked the outlets. Fine. I checked the backpack and put my nose to the strap. Nothing. The smell was just in the air, a light touch, then gone. I told myself it was from the neighbor's place. I told myself a lot of things. Sometimes if I'm up late and I forget what I'm doing and a video autoplay pulls up a clip of Koyasan or temple bells or a walk through old cedar trees, I get a sensation on the back of my right shoulder that isn't quite a touch. It's a place my skin now thinks is a target. It fades when I put my hand there, and there is never anything on my palm when I look. I sleep with the envelope in the drawer next to the bed, not because I think it protects me, but because the old man told me to keep it and I'm still stupidly obedient. If you go, which you should, because Koyasan is beautiful and old in a way that makes you better behaved without scolding, you'll probably have a normal, quiet walk with the living and the dead both minding their business. Bow at the bridge. Don't take photos where they ask you not to. Stay after sunset if you want to know how big your own breathing sounds in a world that does not need you to be loud. If the lanterns light one by one, don't pretend they don't. If you hear the soft slap of sandals behind you, move your eyes forward, not back. If you find that your prints stop where you didn't, count and keep count. If anyone at the gate tells you to walk and not to look behind, believe that, just for that path, for that night, that it is better to do exactly what you're told. And if when you come home, something like a thumb of ash remains where your backpack strap crosses your shoulder, don't wash it too hard. Some things you carry because they are heavy, some things you carry because it is polite to return them when you can, to the place where you did. I worked nights at La Recoleta the year my dad got sick, and I needed a job that let me visit him in the mornings. I wasn't a historian or a guide. I was the guy who carried a ring of keys that looked like something out of an old movie, changed dead bulbs, swept up after stray cats, and told teenagers not to climb the marble angels. If you've never been, Recoleta is not a normal cemetery. It's a small stone city of the dead. Narrow lanes, bronze gates, stained glass, family names etched deeper than most people's memory. The kind of place where footsteps carry and time feels like it doesn't move quite right. The first person to tell me about the padlocks was Jorge, the oldest caretaker on our team. He was 60, wiry, the type who smokes 2 cigarettes back to back and calls everyone pipe whether you're 12 or 35. He'd worked there long enough to know which doors swell in humidity and which cats act as weather vanes. He had the keys to everything, and his belt creaked when he walked. He said he heard a lock click when he'd already latched it. He closed up a small family mausoleum on a Tuesday close to dusk, slid the steel hasp through the bronze loop, and just as he stepped away, he heard the sound of a padlock snapping into place. The thing is, he hadn't used a lock. He'd only set the hasp so he could come back with the right key. He patted all his pockets and found the padlock and its key still there. He tried to open the door and couldn't. The lock was on it, neat and perfect, like it had been there for years. He thought he was losing his mind, didn't say anything, and went home. In the morning, he went back with me and our manager, Marta. We opened it with the key he swore he hadn't used, and there was a fresh scratch on the inside of the bronze door. Not outside. Inside. A single shallow new line, as if something had dragged a nail across it from within the mausoleum in the hours the door had been sealed. You learn not to dramatize things in places like that. Wind does strange things in those stone alleys. Temperature changes make metal ping and pop. Tourists think they're hearing whispers because they expect to. I told Jorge we probably misremembered which lock he used. He didn't argue. He just put out another cigarette, ground it without looking, and said we should avoid working that narrow passage after dark. The passage has a name among the workers. Pasillo de los Suspiros, the Alley of Sighs. It runs behind the big names tourists come to see, and dead ends at a family vault with a tree root pushing up through a crack in the stone. You could stand there and smell damp flowers, bronze polish, old dust. Cats live like princes out there. They lounge on tomb roofs and blink at you like you're the intruder. Not them. 2 nights after the scratch, I had the late shift with Nico, a security guard from Chacarita, who studied for exams during the quiet hours. He was 23, dark hair shaved short, always tapping a bead on his thigh. He liked to tell stories while he studied, like it helped him remember. He told me an old rumor about a caretaker who got locked in during the 70s and died of a heart attack before morning. He said the man's keys were found outside the door, and no one knew how the padlock turned without a hand. People embellish. Rumors stretch. I laughed, told him he sounded like a guide trying to get a big tip. He shrugged and asked me to walk the Alley of Sighs with him anyway, because his shift memo said we had to check a light. He didn't want to go alone. That night, the air was clean after a brief rain. The jacarandas outside the walls had dropped purple flowers that stuck like stamps to your shoes. We walked down the alley with our flashlights low, not aiming them into the mausoleums because the light cuts through stained glass in a way that feels like pointing at someone sleeping. We passed angels with water stains like tears and names I couldn't pronounce. We checked the light, replaced it, and on the way back I heard it. A bright click-shut sound, the small, precise snap of a lock closing. I stopped. Nico said he heard it too. We both turned around fast, scanning. The sound had come from 5 or 6 meters behind us, around a bend where the alley narrows to 1 person wide. I jogged back and found the Soria family vault, the one Jorge had latched 2 days earlier. The door had a padlock now, though when we'd passed it minutes earlier I would have sworn there wasn't one. It was the same old model we used everywhere, the kind with a spot of missing paint near the base and a stamped number. I touched it and felt cold through the metal like it had been kept somewhere cool. "Which key?" Nico asked. "Mine won't fit this brand," I said. "It's Jorge's lock. Or Marta's." "Maybe Jorge came back," Nico said, which was funny because Jorge goes nowhere after his dinner. We tried our radios. Mine hissed. His didn't answer. We didn't want to call Marta after 9 unless there was blood, so we wrote it down and moved on. I told myself again there had to be an explanation. A guide had put it on. Another caretaker passed through. Something. The next morning, Jorge and I opened the Soria vault. The lock turned with his key like butter. Inside, it smelled of old stone and wax. The vault was simple. 4 niches for coffins, a little shelf with brittle flowers left by someone who still cared, a stained glass panel that made the morning sun into bruised wine. On the inside of the door, the fresh scratch from Tuesday was there, about waist height. But there was another one, lower, as if someone had scraped the metal again the night before. You could feel the burr with your fingernail, sharp enough to catch cotton. Marta was practical. She said to keep a log, note the time we heard sounds, and stop telling Nico rumors. She said the city was cutting hours and we needed to look busy and responsible. I could tell she was trying to balance people and politics because the cemetery attracts tourists and money. And nobody wants a story about locks clicking by themselves. She assigned me more daytime maintenance. She assigned Jorge to the front half. She assigned the Alley of Sighs to herself after 3. It would prove nothing, she said, except that keys don't turn themselves. None of that mattered to the cats. They avoided the alley for a few days. Usually they sun on the low roof of the Soria vault. Instead, they lounged near the statue of the drowned sailor with the small dog sculpted at his feet, as if the dog statue made the cats feel safe. I noticed because one of the cats, a big orange tom with a torn ear we called Capitan, used to take food from my hand near Soria. He watched me from a different path now and didn't blink. Animals change routines for reasons we don't see, but it added to the feeling that something was leaning on that corner of the cemetery, like a thumb pressing into a bruise. On Friday around 4, a woman in her 70s came to ask for the Soria key. She had 2 white carnations and a folded piece of paper in her purse. She had the look of someone who hadn't planned to cry and would cry anyway. Her name was Elvira. She said her parents were there and her brother, and could we please open it? She wouldn't be long. I walked her there because Marta was on a call. She talked as we walked, the way people do when they step into that city of stone and want to be sure they aren't alone. She told me her brother died at 19 in a river accident up north and her mother never forgave the water. She told me they moved from the neighborhood years ago and she didn't come as often now because her knees hurt on the cobbles. I opened the door for her with Jorge's key because it had become a habit to use his on Soria. The padlock, which had been on and off all week without any of us owning that action, looked dull in the slant of the sun. The inside of the door had both scratches and a third one, newer, thin as a hair, shallow but definitely there. She didn't notice. She put the carnations in a jar on the shelf and leaned her forehead against the bronze bolt, just for a second, like it could cool something that burned in her. When we stepped back into the alley, she told me to wait a minute because she had written something to leave inside. She unfolded the paper, read it again, and didn't go back in. She folded it smaller until it was a square and put it on top of the lock. Sometimes locks know what to keep and what to let go, she said, and I didn't know what that meant and didn't ask. She left me standing there with her folded note on the lock like a paper hat. I slipped it in my pocket because paper gets wet in the night air, and then I felt like I'd done something wrong and put it on the little shelf instead, between the ugly angel and the jar. I closed the door and latched it. The padlock was in my pocket. I could feel its weight when I walked away. If you're waiting for something dramatic, it comes now. We decided to stay late that night because there had been kids drinking in the back lanes, and because the tourists had gotten bold about climbing to take photos. Nico said he'd do one extra circuit with me if we brought empanadas from the shop on Vicente Lopez. We ate on a bench by the wall, listening to a soccer game from a nearby apartment through an open window, the crowd noises blending with doves cooing in the trees. The cemetery gets a skin at night like a different place pulled tight over the bones of the day. The same angel looks kinder at 10 in the morning than at 10 at night. I've never learned why. We took our flashlights and started in the new section, worked down the lanes, and eventually, because I didn't want to say I was avoiding it, we turned into the Alley of Sighs. I feel the need to say we weren't chasing anything. We were doing our job. The light over the Soria vault was on now, the one we'd replaced. It gave everything a yellow cast that made the stone look like old teeth. I saw the folded note Elvira had left. It was gone. Not on the shelf. Not on the ground. We were 2 meters from the door when something clicked. You know the sound. We didn't move. Everything else kept going. Faint traffic beyond the wall, cicadas, a siren miles away, Nico breathing. Then another click farther down the alley. Then another. Locks closing. I swear to you it went like a wave down the row. Snap, snap, snap. Not loud, not violent, just sure. I felt every hair lift on my arms. Not because I believe in anything, but because I know the difference between a sound made because metal moved in heat and a sound made because someone made it happen. We did not run. We are not the dramatic kind. But we walked faster than we had been walking, and we weren't ashamed of that. "Who's there?" Nico called. Because that is the thing humans do, even though we know if someone answers, it won't make us less afraid. No one answered. The cats weren't anywhere. Not even Capitan. We reached the Soria door and stopped. A small triangle had been scratched beneath the other lines on the inside of the door. You could see it through the narrow gap between the bronze and the jamb when our flashlights hit it just right. I would not have noticed it if I hadn't already been primed to look. The bronze had a brighter shine where the scratch was, like raw metal flashed through oxidation. "I'm opening it," I said. I don't know why. It felt like the worst idea and the only one. We were the ones with keys. It was the thing I could do to prove to myself that doors worked like doors. "Don't," Nico said, but I already had the key out. The lock turned without resistance. The door opened on its hinges as if nothing had ever been wrong in the world. The air inside had the same old stone smell, but it was cooler than outside, like a cellar. Nico stood in the doorway. I stepped in and set my light on the floor to keep both hands free in case the door tried anything stupid. The new scratch was definitely there. The triangle shape like someone testing a point. There was a smear near it that could have been oil from a finger. I leaned down and smelled the door because I was doing everything wrong and might as well keep going. Bronze. Dust. Something like wax. "Okay," Nico said from the threshold. "Okay, you saw it, let's go." I turned to answer him and the door swung. Not a gust, not a slow drift. It moved like a hand had pulled it. It clicked my shoulder lightly as it passed, like a person squeezing by in a crowded train. I jumped back, reached to catch it, missed, and before I could think, there was a sound right next to my face. The padlock. The lock had snapped shut. I froze. Nico set his shoulder against the door. "Open it," he said, but I had no key to the outside. The lock was out there in his hand or mine a moment before, and now it was in use between us. I pulled the bolt on the inside. It didn't move. We both knew it shouldn't. The lock was on the outside. The bolt on the inside is decorative, a nod to original hardware. The real security is the padlock that only turns from out there. "Give me a second," Nico said. "Don't panic." "I'm not panicking," I said. And then I realized I was holding my breath like a kid in a pool who loses track of the ladder. We tried the radio. Mine hissed. His hissed. The air felt colder. I listened to it like it had a sound, and I decided there was something to listen to, like air pressing its ear to the same door from the opposite side. I set my flashlight on the shelf. The light made the stained glass smear colors up the back wall and across the side of a coffin plate. The plate had the family name, Soria, simple and straight without dates. The lower niche, where Elvira had placed her flowers, had a small old padlock hanging on a ring for a drawer that hadn't been opened in decades. It was the same style as the one on the door. I don't know why that mattered, it did. My ring of keys felt heavier on my belt. I thought of the folded note. If you're the kind of person who believes in patterns, this would have felt like one. "Get Marta," I said. "Get bolt cutters. Get anything." "Nico, talk to me while you walk," he talked. I could hear his footsteps fade, then come back, then fade because the alley plays with distance. He said he was calling Marta. He said he was grabbing the cutters. He said he could still see my light through the gap. He said to keep talking. I told him okay. I told him I could see a small bloom of corrosion around the lower hinge. I told him there were 3 scratches and a triangle on the inside of the door. I told him the stain on the floor looked like someone once dropped a bucket of oil and tried to wipe it, and if you stood there long enough you could smell old polish, the kind that smells like oranges. I said anything I could think to say to fill the space between him and me. Something moved behind me, not loud, not big. A small adjustment like someone in the next row shifted their weight. I turned. My light didn't move because I had set it down. I saw nothing change. I heard metal begin to complain in a steady, patient way. It wasn't the door. It was thinner. It came from inside the vault, from the lower niche with the small old lock. It was the sound of a tiny bolt sliding slowly as if someone were trying to move it after years of being fused in place. I said, "Nico," and he answered, and I felt stupid for saying his name like that. The small lock didn't open. It just squealed and then stopped. In the stop was a kind of attention. I don't know how else to write that. I felt noticed in a way that was not about sight. "Keep talking," Nico said. He was back at the door. I could see his shoes through the narrow space where bronze didn't quite meet stone. The space went black as he placed something against it. I heard the dry bark of bolt cutters and a small grunt of effort. "It's not biting," he said. "The lock isn't taking. It's like it's already open, but it's not. It's closed, wait. Marta's coming." I put my hand on the inside face of the door, right where the scratches were. The metal felt normal. Cold, a little rough where the burr lifted. For a reason I cannot defend, I pressed my palm and then my ear to the bronze. When you put your ear to old metal in a quiet place, you can hear your own blood. You can hear the city on the other side, faint, refracted like listening from the bottom of a pool. I heard those things. And I heard a small rhythmic sound like the lightest tap of a key against a key ring. Tap, tap, tap. It came not from outside. It came from the bronze itself. The way a pipe in a building can carry a sound from 2 floors away and make it feel inside your wall. I took my ear away. The tapping stopped. I put it back. It started again. I don't know how long this lasted, a minute or 5. When you are in a small space with your breath and someone else's problem on the other side of a door, time is rude to you. I closed my eyes. I thought about Elvira. I thought about the way she said locks know what to keep and what to let go. I thought about my father sleeping in his chair with the TV on too loud. I thought about how sometimes people make pits in the world with their grief and sometimes the world leans to fill them. "Nico," I said. "Here," he said. And the cutters barked again and I heard Marta's voice. Calm, irritated, not scared, telling him to hold steady, telling me to step back. I stepped back. The padlock didn't fall because they hadn't cut it. Marta said, "It just opened." I didn't turn it. She said it in the voice you use when you are not going to admit you don't like the thing your mouth is reporting. The door swung in. The padlock was in her hand, cold, unmarked. I stepped into the alley. The air that hit my face felt warmer than it should have. I set my hand on the cool wall and then took it off, like touching something someone has told you not to touch. Nico still had the bolt cutters lifted, his eyes wide and silly with adrenaline. Marta looked at me and then at the door and then at the scratches on the inside. She pressed her finger to one of them and came away with a tiny curl of bright metal, the shaving like a sliver of nail. "We're calling it vandalism," she said, "because that is what managers say when the other word for something threatens their job. We'll change the lock. We'll file a report. You," she meant me, "go drink some water. You look like milk." I didn't argue. I sat on the bench where we had eaten and Nico handed me his bottle. The jacaranda leaves rubbed together like paper skin. A guide's voice drifted from the front gates where some late tour was finishing. Evita was the only word that carried. The cats had returned. Capitan watched from the roof of a different vault, tail twitching. I looked at the padlock in Marta's hand. It looked like any other. We watched the camera later. The cemetery had cameras in 4 places. None of them pointed down the alley of size because of privacy complaints. The nearest was at the corner that sees the alley entrance. You could see me and Nico turn into it. You could see us come out later with Marta. In the middle, between those moments, the audio track registered 5 small clicks at uneven intervals. Not loud, not near the camera, like knuckles tapping on a tabletop 3 rooms away. The timestamp put those clicks somewhere in the minutes I was inside. Cameras are liars sometimes, but they're also screwy little witnesses. I copied the clip to my phone and listened to it 3 times and then deleted it because I realized I would play it over and over at night and stop sleeping. We changed the lock the next day. We scratched a tiny X under the new one, on the inside of the door, a mechanic's mark so we could be sure any fresh lines weren't accidents. For a week, nothing strange happened. The cats returned to their old posts. Elvira came back on Sunday and thanked me for letting her in, and I didn't tell her anything about being stuck. I asked about the note like I was asking about the weather. She smiled like those smiles that don't reach the eyes and said she changed her mind and took it back. I don't know if that's true. I didn't see her take anything. People don't like the idea of leaving a piece of themselves behind. A week later, Jorge called me to the Soria door in the morning. He didn't say why. He just said venite. His face was tired. He put his finger on the inside of the door where our X was. The X was there, and beneath it was another thin scratch, a new one. He took my hand, which is not something Jorge does, and put my finger to the burr so I could feel it without trusting my eyes. "Sometimes we keep the wrong things," he said. "Sometimes the locks help," we told Marta. She said what we knew she would say. We changed that lock again and then stopped leaving a lock on at night, using only the latch, telling ourselves that removing the piece of metal that could click meant taking away the possibility of hearing the sound we didn't want to hear. For a while it worked. Doors were doors again. Cats lounged. Tourists asked for famous names and left lipstick on a certain marble. Here's what stayed with me. I started hearing the lock sound in my apartment. Not a lot. Not like a haunting in a movie. Just once on a Tuesday in the kitchen, when I set down my key ring and stepped away. I turned because the sound of small metal closing is a sound you react to when you hold keys for a living. The ring had shifted slightly on the counter, like someone had plucked it with their finger. I didn't move. I watched it until the coffee boiled over. A few days later, I noticed a faint bright line on the inside of my apartment door at about knee height. A scratch that hadn't been there, one I could feel with my nail. My building is old. People drag things through hallways. I sanded the burr and painted over it because I didn't want to think in triangles and crosshatches. I still have a job at Recoleta. People ask me for directions. Tourists hold maps that fold like origami and ask for names they mispronounce, and I like them better for trying. I give water to cats and chase teenagers off statues. The Alley of Sighs is just a place between other places most days. But sometimes, right when the sun slides behind the buildings and the heat gives up, I'll be walking there and I'll reach for my keys to reassure myself that I'm the person who decides what opens and what closes. My hand will touch the ring and it will feel lighter, just enough to make me look. The keys will all be there. The ring will be cool. Everything will be normal. Still, I will stand a little too long at the Soria door, poised like I'm listening for someone to speak. I won't open it when I feel like that. I don't go in when the air seems to be holding its breath. And when someone leaves flowers, I leave the door open an extra minute before I close it. Just time enough for what needs to leave and what needs to stay to find the courage to stay. If you go, you'll pass that alley and not know which vault is the one. You'll think you hear small sounds in the metal and tell yourself it's nothing. You'll be right. You'll be wrong. You'll drop your ticket in the trash and go have coffee on a sunlit corner and think about how the city vibrates with life. You won't think about the little clicks until you're home, putting your own keys on your own table, and you'll hear one tiny sound that could be anything. You'll tell yourself it was the ring settling. You'll be right. You'll be wrong. And if you feel like your door is safer when you leave it open for the space of a breath before you turn the lock, you won't be able to explain why. You'll just do it. I said earlier that I'm not a believer. That's still true. I'm a person who sweeps leaves and changes bulbs and says we're closed at the end of the day. But there's a difference between believing and taking a place at its word. La Recoleta is a city where doors talk. They don't use a language you can translate, but they are not quiet. Some pads, some bars, some bolts know how to keep what needs keeping. Some know when to let go. And some once in a while will click shut, not because your hand turned them, but because, for a few minutes in the long night, the inside of a door wants to be a door more than it wants to be a way out. If you ever hear it, that bright tiny sound from the wrong side of the metal, you'll do what I did. You'll listen. You'll press your palm to the cold and you'll feel nothing clear. And then you'll keep listening anyway, holding still until someone with better words comes along with cutters or keys or a voice that says your name like a rope thrown across water. And when you step into the air again, you'll try to make sense of it and fail, and you'll drink water and go back to work. Later, in a quiet hour, you'll find a small new line somewhere no one but you will see. You'll smooth it with your finger and leave it alone. You'll take out your keys at night and lay them where you can see them. And you'll lock your door from the outside when you leave for work. Just like always, but you'll feel better if you pause a second. Hand on the knob, giving whatever is on the other side time to make its choice. I make my rent guiding people through St. Louis Cemetery No. 1. It's the little city of the dead a few blocks from the quarter. All bright white walls and narrow alleys and crypts stacked like ovens. On a hot day, the sun bounces off the stucco and you feel it coming at you from every angle, like you're walking inside a toaster. People imagine cemeteries are cool and shady. This one isn't. It smells like hot stone, old lime, and sometimes, if a storm is coming, a faint mineral tang like pennies on your tongue. I've been licensed for 5 years, which means I unlock the gate with a code, walk tourists past the archdiocese sign that says not to write on the tombs, and speak in a voice that carries. Above ground because of the water table, I tell them. Society tombs. Family vaults. Please don't lean on anything. I know every crooked corner and crack. I know where teenagers carve initials and where brass nameplates get stolen and replaced. I know which local cats claim certain crypt roofs around noon, when the heat makes the marble too hot for paws. And now I know what it feels like when a sealed crypt breathes on you. This happened at 3 in the afternoon on a day the weather app said, feels like 104. I had 9 people. A Wisconsin family in matching red NOLA 2025 shirts. A honeymoon couple with a disposable camera, her in a straw hat, him already pink at the nose. 2 college kids with iced coffees they weren't supposed to bring inside, and a local grandmother in ironed linen named Miss Geneva, who told me she'd brought her niece before Katrina, when you could still wander in alone. We drifted down a lane so tight the shoulders of the group brushed both sides. I was doing my usual talk about oven vaults, how caretakers used to open them and slide caskets in, how bones were later pushed to the back to make room, when a fine, cold breath came through the seam of the slab to my left and ran right across my wrist. It was so wrong that my brain stalled trying to label it. The air in the cemetery is thick and hot. This was thin and chilled, like the air that escapes when you open a freezer. It wasn't just temperature either. It had a smell. A clean, wet sweetness that registered after a beat as lilies, the funeral kind, all pollen and pharmacy and something like candle wax. I stopped mid-sentence. Everyone looked at me. The grandmother in linen pinched her nose and said, "Child, you smell flowers?" One of the college kids said, "Bro, did you put on cologne?" The way 20-year-olds think they're funny. The honeymoon woman turned toward the vault and made a little O sound like you do at fireworks. Down the seam of the stone at the height of my wrist, a crescent of moisture appeared and then vanished, not like sweat from my skin, more like breath on a car window that fades. I didn't tell them anything then. I finished the tour. The Wisconsin dad tipped me a 5 and said, "Good presentation," and they went back out into Basin Street, and I went into the staff office where there's a window unit that rattles and dribbles and a desk with a ledger and a laminate sign about respectful behavior. Lucille, who manages our schedules, looked up from her phone. She's from Violet and she keeps her hair twisted up with a pencil, so the eraser sticks up like a tiny antenna. I asked her if anyone had been opening vaults that day for maintenance, for heat release, or for any reason. She laughed. "You know the Archdiocese. You think they're opening anything without 6 emails and a deacon?" Then she saw my face and said softer, "What did you smell?" I said lilies, and she swiveled the ledger toward me. We track the special stuff in a paper book even though everything else is digital. Deliveries, private memorials, which tour companies are on probation for talking nonsense. She flipped to the page for that row. The column marked with the vault number had no service entries, no maintenance, nothing. Just a short line handwritten under notes dated 2 days before. "Deliver lilies, anniversary." Who wrote that? I asked. Florist dropped them at the gate. "The same note's been coming every year," Lucille said. "Standing order." We leave them on the step. "You're not supposed to set things inside." "Who's it for?" She shrugged. "Vault's got a family name, but the order never says who. Cash in an envelope. Sometimes a bunch of coins. Old-fashioned, like out of a movie." I told myself there'd been a pressure change, a thunderhead moving in, the cracked seam of the door creating a vent. I taught a whole next tour telling people about the science of hot air rising in cool drafts, and never once talked about the cold touch still ghosting my skin. I went home to my shotgun in mid-city, drank water and watched lightning tremble over the Lafitte Greenway. The next day it pulled at me. I'm not proud of that curiosity. It's the thing that makes tour guides good and also makes us fools. Between my first and second groups, I took the long way around so I'd pass the same vault again. The lilies from the delivery were there, leaning in a little clear vase you buy in bulk. The kind you return if you're polite. White throats, gold dust on the stamens, no wilt. They were lilies you smell at the funeral home and then smell again on your dress later when you get home, and wish you'd changed before hugging your aunt. The stone was unremarkable except for a carved family name worn blurry by heat and years. No fresh mortar, no chips. I put my hand near the seam and felt nothing but heat coming off the stone strong enough to sting. A lizard skittered across my shoe and I jumped like a kid. When I turned, Miss Geneva was standing behind me with a water bottle. "Some places keep their own weather," she said, and then left it there. By the weekend, the group story started. On Saturday, an older man in a saint's visor asked if we piped cold air into the cemetery for effect. On Sunday, a girl in a black dress leaned close to me on that same lane and whispered. She just sighed. "Did you hear her?" I said because part of the job is giving people a way to carry what they felt. You'd be surprised what these old places hold. She touched the lilies lightly, like you'd touch a sleeping cat, and pulled her finger back dusty with pollen. When something happens enough times, guides talk about it in the office whether we should or not. Caleb, who's been doing this since there were more ferries than Uber drivers, said maybe the exhale was just the heat. Like how big pots burp, he said, stirring a powdered beignet mix into his coffee. They bake out here. Sometimes they breathe. But this is cold air, I said. Could be a downdraft. Could be a trick of nerves. You get lightheaded. People faint. He pointed at my paper cup of electrolyte drink. I see your smart water. Could be, Lucille said, which is how she says let's not feed this thing. I told myself I'd leave it alone. That lasted 3 days. On the 4th, I went to the flower shop. It's over on Piety, the kind of small place where one person can see the door and the back cooler at the same time. The owner is a woman younger than she looks because people who handle weddings and funerals get older faster. She had sleeves of roses lying on damp paper, and when I explained I was a cemetery guide, she did that polite smile people do when they think you're going to complain about parking. No complaint, I said. I'm asking about an order. Every year y'all deliver lilies to a vault in St. Louis number 1. No name, just anniversary? She waited long enough that I said, if that's private, I understand. It's private, she said, but I can tell you this. She went to a drawer and pulled a manila folder, flipped through receipts written by hand, and showed me a sheet that had been photocopied so many times the edges had turned gray. The earliest date on the top was 1989, the name on the line for payer read K. Duplessis, the amount, cash. Under notes, deliver lilies, anniversary. The next sheet had the same. The one after that. Some years had the request in different handwriting, the letters sharper or looser. Some had a little heart drawn after anniversary. A page from 2005 had a water stain that wrinkled the corner. The most recent copy had Lucille's note scrawled in the corner. Received by office, envelope taped under gate keypad, $60 in quarters. Who is K. Duplessis? I asked. Came in the first year, the florist said. Paid up for 10 years in case she got run over by a bus, that's how she put it. Then came in again, renewed. Then someone else came in once. Then nobody. But the envelope shows up. It's the same words every time. I don't ask questions. If a tradition wants to keep itself alive, I let it. What anniversary? I asked, almost certain she'd say a wedding. She shrugged. It never says. It was a week later when the breathing turned into something I can't rationalize without lying to you. I'm writing this because I'd rather it live somewhere outside my head. It was the 12th of June. That's not me adding drama. Lucille said later that when she stuck the new note in the ledger, she noticed the pattern. The envelopes always came the second week of June. The office calendar had a sticky tab there that read, Lilies, Row D. It was the last tour of the day, private, paid for by a couple from Ohio, who had questions about voodoo and then apologized for calling it voodoo. The sky had been building a storm all afternoon. That lead weight feeling when the pressure is about to drop and the sky gets green around the edges. You could smell rain in the live oaks by the wall. The group before me had left a trail of wet footprints from damp rid buckets someone knocked over, and the cats had gone quiet. When the air turned odd, the birds didn't sit on the wires. Those are the little signals that make you stand still without knowing why. I'd just finished my piece about the society tombs when the Ohio husband asked if the voodoo queen was here. We were within sight of the tomb people like to think is Marie Laveau's, the one covered in faint graffiti X's you can't see unless the light hits right, even though we tell people not to mark it. I told him I could talk about it, but we wouldn't go up close. He was fine with that. His wife was quiet, holding her tote bag the way you hold a purse on a subway. Then the first breath came. It slid out from the seam at wrist height again, but stronger, long enough that I could feel the hairs on my arm lift and smooth. It was cold, clean. The lily smell so fresh I could taste the powder. The Ohio wife flinched. "Do you feel that?" she said. Her husband frowned and then said, "Air conditioning? That's clever." He put his hand to the stone, then jerked it back. "It's burning." Before I could say anything, the breath paused. Then it came again, 2 short exhalations like someone laughing without sound. I stepped back and bumped into the wife. The alley felt narrower than it had a second ago. The seam where the breath came through had gone from hairline to something I could see, a vertical dark like pencil lead. As I watched, moisture beaded along it the way a glass sweats. A fat drop formed, Traced a path over a chip and the smell of lilies deepened, sweeter and thicker. Too much, almost bitter. I felt light the way heat makes you muzzy. I told the couple we were going to take a wider turn around this block and they could ask me more questions at the gate. That's when the stone made a sound. It wasn't a crack. It wasn't a snap. It was a steady, low, hollow hum like you hear when you put your ear to a seashell. Except it was coming through my hand into my bones. The husband said, "What is that?" "Is that safe?" and took his wife's elbow. I moved them along and kept my voice calm. I didn't touch the stone again. We made it to the end of the lane where it opens into the little square with the society tomb with the urns. A wind came through then that smelled like damp dust. You could see the storm sweeping across Treme, the fat first drop smacking into the hot roof of the caretaker shed and exploding into steam. My radio crackled with Lucille saying, "Wrap up. Lightning protocol." I nodded even though she couldn't see me and turned to get them out. We were one turn from the gate when Ohio husband froze. "Did you hear that?" he said. Before I could answer, it came again. A long, tired sigh, not from a single point, but from a dozen seams all around us. A cart moved on the far path without a person pushing it, wheels ticking. A plastic vase rolled and knocked against a step and knocked again like a little hand testing. From 7 different doors, the cold air came, a braided whisper of lily and candle, and underneath it something not sweet at all, something like old iron. The wife pressed against my arm hard enough to hurt. The husband said her name over and over. My radio hissed and then went dead. The sky opened. Rain hit the hot stone and turned to a sheet that made the air strobe white. We ran. I don't want to pretend I was brave. We ran to the gate and the keypad beeping sounded like a microwave in a quiet kitchen. My hands were shaking and I missed the code twice. Lucille was already on the other side with the umbrella we keep by the sign for respectful visitor guidelines, yelling that the strike count was too high and we had to get out. I punched the code again. On the 4th try, the lock thunked and she pulled us through. Rain pounded the asphalt. The Ohio wife cried in immediate, relieved gulps. The husband said, as if he needed to believe it, "It was pressure." That was pressure. It's the weather. I nodded because sometimes the right thing is to give someone a rope back to ordinary. I went back in with Caleb once the strike window passed and the lightning went east. The lilies were still on the step of the vault. They'd collected raindrops in their throats that magnified the veins. The seam didn't look any wider. When I put my palm there, the heat stung. In the office, the air conditioner had given up for the day, and everything smelled like damp paper and coil dust. Lucille had the ledger open with a date written in the margin, June 12th. Under it, in pencil, someone had added a tiny heart. The point of the heart stuttered like the pencil had trembled. "Who drew that?" I asked. "I didn't," she said. "It wasn't there when I went to get y'all." Caleb stood by the window with his hands in his pockets. His face had the shut-in look of someone keeping a story from running wild. "Years ago," he said, not looking at me, "we had a guide who brought lilies every June. Tall woman, gray braid. Said it was for the Duplessis anniversary. She was light on details. She had a stroke leading a tour. Dropped right there by row D. Survived, I think, retired. After that, the envelopes started coming." "What anniversary?" I asked again, because it felt like a loop I might be able to step out of if I found the right word. He shrugged. "People promise each other all kinds of things. People promise the dead more than they promise the living. Maybe it was a wedding. Maybe 2 kids who picked this as a meet spot and one never came. Maybe a mother and a daughter. Maybe it's not about the people at all. Maybe some places just want 1 day a year to breathe. We didn't put that in any brochure. We talked about permitted hours and proper behavior and the importance of not stealing brick chips. I slept terribly for a week anyway. 2 days after the storm, someone tucked a single lily under my windshield wiper. No note. I stood in the hospital parking lot where my friend Casey works nights and stared at it, while the automatic lights clicked on one by one. I took it home and put it in a glass. The pollen turned my thumbs yellow when I moved it, and I thought about a woman drawing a heart in a ledger with a pencil that shook, and wondered if that pencil had been her hand or someone else's. Things returned to the way strange things usually do. The next tours were normal. People asked me about Nicolas Cage and Marie Laveau, and why there were shells on a certain step. A kid from Florida tried to climb a wall and I had to speak sharply, and he looked at me with that wounded, indignant teenager face, and I wanted to apologize and didn't. The lilies on the step browned at the tips, and then I found the vase gone one morning, probably taken by whoever leaves the place decent when we're not looking. I avoided that lane for a while, and then I made myself walk it again, and it was just an alley in a hot cemetery. That's almost worse. In late July, an older woman came to the office and asked for Lucille. She wore a long denim skirt and had that weathered look of people who've been outside most of their lives. When she smiled, it was like a crack opening in wood. She said her name was Karen. The way she said it, it sounded like an old name again, not a punchline. I used to work here, she said. I wondered if anyone remembered me. Caleb remembered. He hugged her gingerly like she might break, and he looked at her like someone recognizing their own handwriting in a book. She apologized for making a fuss back then. She had a tremor in her right hand and a stubborn tilt to her chin. She asked if she could walk the rows alone for a while. Lucille said yes on the condition I shadowed at a distance just to keep an eye. I did. Karen moved like she was measuring, like each step had a memory attached. When she reached the Duplessis vault, she stopped. She put her hand near the seam and then lowered it. She didn't bring flowers. She didn't open anything. She just stood there with her eyes closed. After a minute she spoke, whisper quiet, and I caught only pieces. I kept it, she said. I kept it. I told you I would. When she came back to the office, she thanked us and left an envelope with Lucille. It had $60 and a handful of quarters. The note said, in a hand that trembled and tried not to, "Deliver lilies. Anniversary." I asked her in the parking lot what anniversary it was. I tried to be gentle. She put her hands on the roof of her car like she needed to steady the world, and looked at me with eyes that went from blue to gray. "It's for my parents," she said. "They were married the day the storm came in '62. His family had a vault here. We always joked the old ones would eavesdrop on the vows. He died young. I brought lilies the first 10 years because she loved the smell and he hated it, and then because I didn't know what else to do, and then because I was afraid to stop. Then I got sick and started forgetting things. I put money aside so whoever found the envelope would know it mattered. She stopped. People think the living keep the dead alive. Sometimes I think the dead keep us alive by making us keep our promises." She drove off. The next June, I'll probably walk that lane again with 9 tourists and a bottle of water, and a speech about oven vaults. I won't mention breathing. I won't mention how, when the thunderheads sit heavy over Rampart and the cats flatten themselves under the steps, the air there goes thin and strange. I won't say that when it happens, and it happens. I hold my wrist where the cold first brushed me and think of a tiny penciled heart and an envelope taped under a keypad in the heat. I won't tell them that on that anniversary day the vaults do not feel unwilling, that the sound is not a groan or a warning. It is a release, like someone finally letting out air they've held too long. You can say there's a reason. Pressure, storms, cracked mortar, weird thermals, draft physics. You can say that, and I will nod and give you the code to the gate, and we will both step back into a world that prefers answers with edges. You can walk away and keep whatever you felt in there in a small box and never open it again. Most people do. But when I lock up at the end of the day and the sun whitewashes everything and the whole place smells like wet stone and a sweetness that never lasts, I wait a second, just in case. Sometimes a cool edge of air slips out into my palm like the hand of someone drifting past a stranger, and it carries enough lily with it that I know somebody is still marking something they don't want to forget. I stand there with my hand open until it's gone, and then I put the ledger back in the drawer. On the date, there's still a heart. I don't know who drew this year's. I don't need to. The first time it happened, I was running the coastal walk before sunrise because it was the only time the path was empty, and I liked the way the ocean sounded when the city was still half asleep. I'd moved to Sydney for work 6 months earlier and rented a small place near Bondi with a roommate named Liam, who was one of those cheerful, practical Australian guys who could fix a leaking tap with pliers and a swear word. I'm not that guy. I make lists. I set alarms. I put my phone on airplane mode so my offline playlist doesn't get interrupted by spam calls from numbers with too many digits. That morning, it was a Monday in late winter, cold enough that my breath came out in little puffs, and the sandstone along the cliffs felt damp. The sun hadn't broken the horizon yet, but the eastern sky had that fish-belly gray to it, and Waverly Cemetery lay ahead like a city made of chalk. I always slowed down there. The iron fence was ribbed and cold under my palm if I touched it, and the headstones looked like they were watching the water. If you're not from here, Waverly sits right on the cliff edge. The ocean is not a view. It is a wall of sound. When the swell is heavy, you can feel it through your feet. I stopped to stretch, leaned against the fence, and took out my phone to skip a track. Airplane mode on, battery at 93%. Nothing unusual. When I put it back in my pocket, it buzzed. I thought I'd imagined it because airplane mode kills the radio, but it buzzed again. A short double tap. I pulled it out and saw a missed call. The caller ID said, "Unknown, below." I remember thinking it was a glitch, like some contact name got mangled. The screen said missed call 5:41 a.m. It was 5:42 by the lock screen clock. There was a voicemail icon too, the little tape reel I never use. I pressed play without taking off airplane mode because I wanted to see if my phone was just losing it. The voicemail loaded instantly. It shouldn't have. Then the audio started. Wind, the kind that scrapes across a mic, and the long pulse of waves deeper than they sound in person, like you're inside something breathing. For maybe 5 seconds, it was only that. Wind and waves. I lifted my eyes without meaning to and looked at the water beyond the fence. And then a second voice came in, so faint I nearly missed it. It wasn't close to the mic. It was far, like a radio through a wall. It said my childhood nickname. It said Gudu. No one in Australia knew that name. I'd left it on the other side of the world. Only my parents and a couple of cousins called me that, and even they'd switched to my actual name once I hit high school because I hated how small it sounded. I stood there on the path with my thumb on the screen, suddenly feeling stupid and exposed. The voice didn't sound like my mother or my father. It wasn't anyone I recognized. It didn't even sound exactly human. It sounded like someone speaking while their mouth was half full of cold air, like a whisper that had traveled a long way underwater. I didn't finish the run. I walked home, holding the phone like it might go off in my hand. The missed call was still there. The voicemail had no transcript, just transcription unavailable. I kept airplane mode on the entire time because the idea of taking it off felt like opening a window at night. When I got back, Liam was making toast and complaining about the price of avocados like he does every second morning. I told him what happened and he laughed until I showed him the log. "Unknown below?" he said. "That's messed." "You think it's a bug?" I said. "Everything's a bug until it's a feature. Press play." We listened to the voicemail together. He didn't laugh then. His face changed in this small, careful way. He leaned closer like the sound was hiding in the air between us. He didn't recognize the voice. When it said Gudu, he looked at me. "That's your mom's pet name for you?"
My whole family, I said.
"No one calls me that here. How would a scammer know it?" "They wouldn't." "Could be you misheard," he offered, trying to make it normal. I wanted to agree. I told him I must have primed him by saying there was a nickname. But the word had the exact slide my aunties used. The soft G, the double D shortened, the way you only hit that sound if you've said it 1,000 times while someone is small and not listening. We played it again and again. The more I listened, the more I wished I hadn't. Because once you decide a sound is a word, your brain will find it every time. "Turn off airplane mode and call it back," Liam said. I don't know why the idea scared me so much. It felt like looking over a balcony and your stomach says no. "What if it rings?" I said, "and I hear the same wind?" "Then you tell them to get stuffed," he said, trying to be funny. I didn't call. I left for work and pretended I didn't spend the bus ride staring out at gaps between buildings like they were going to answer me. During lunch, I went to a phone store near Martin Place and asked the guy at the counter, Kava, his name tag said, if you could get a voicemail to download while airplane mode was on. He laughed and said no, unless I'd turned it on after the call came in. I told him I'd turned it on before I left the flat. He said maybe it queued and auto-downloaded later when I took it off. I said I hadn't. He said sometimes the indicator doesn't update instantly. I was too embarrassed to push it. That night I told myself I'd run in the other direction for a while just to prove to myself I wasn't being ridiculous. The next morning I put on my cheap gloves and headed toward Tamarama instead of the cemetery. The sky was the color of milk. The path was slick. The sea was throwing white shoulders against the rocks. I kept my phone on airplane mode because superstition feels like safety when you don't name it. I ran until my calves burned and doubled back because that's what you do on a path that wraps a cliff. I made it home without a buzz. I wish that's where it ended. 2 days later, I woke at 3:19 a.m. to my phone vibrating on the nightstand. Not the cheerful chime I use for alarms, the deep physical buzz of a call. I didn't turn on the lamp. I reached for the phone in the dark like it might bite, and I felt the ridges of the case, the smooth glass, the little notch of the volume button. It was still on airplane mode. I know because I left it on every night after that first call like a charm. The screen lit my face in a pale square. The call had ended. Another voicemail icon blinked at me. The caller ID said what it had said before. Unknown. Below. Liam wasn't home. He'd gone to Newcastle for work. I lay back on the pillow and listened to my room fill with the sound of the cemetery's wind, because I knew that's what it was now. The wind on the cliff has a hiss to it, a way of stripping the tops off words. The waves sounded closer this time. And then, in the breath between sets, the voice said my nickname again. Then in a tone that was almost coaxing, like when someone calls a dog at a park, it added, "Come down." The air in my room felt colder than it should have. I don't mean temperature. I mean the way the quiet changed. There was a detail I haven't said yet. The voice didn't have an accent that belonged to any one place. If I had to describe it, I'd say it sounded like someone who'd learned English from family who learned it from the BBC 40 years ago, and then flattened it by living in places where a dozen languages bounce off each other every day, which could be anyone. Which is what made it worse. The next day I didn't go running. I stayed late at work and took the bus to Bronte and walked the path at sunset with other people around me, so I wouldn't feel crazy. The cemetery glowed for 10 minutes like it was made of bone. I stopped by the fence because it felt childish not to. There were flowers on a grave near the path, still in their plastic sleeve, the price sticker half torn, long stems beaded with water. A man in a high-vis jacket knelt 2 rows in, scraping lichen from a headstone with a tool that made a dry sound. When he stood and saw me looking, he nodded. I recognized him from other early mornings. The groundskeeper, or a groundskeeper, tall and thin with a stoop that was habitual, not tired. "Evening," he said. "Evening." He looked at the ocean. We all end up doing that there. "Rough," he said. "Yeah," I said. I don't know why I asked him next what I asked, if I was hoping for a story or permission to have mine. "You ever get calls out here?" He didn't laugh. He squinted at me like he was trying to place whether we knew each other. "Calls?" "Like," I said, and immediately felt stupid. "Phones, dropouts, weird stuff. Phones go mad out here sometimes," he said. "Compass goes loopy too. Blokes treat this walk like a gym and then ring me up because their watch says they ran 30 kilometers in a circle. I tell them the cliff is not responsible for their delusions." He said it without meanness. "Why?" "No reason," I lied. "Just curious." He nodded like he didn't believe me but wasn't going to pry. "People think it's the wind," he said after a second. "Carries everything." "Makes you think you heard your name." "There's a reason the oldest stories are about voices on cliffs." "What's your name?" I asked because it felt polite and I wanted to use something other than the groundskeeper in my head. "Keene," he said. "Mr. Keene, if you're asking me for anything." I smiled. And he didn't. He looked at me with this steady small focus and said, "Don't climb the fence." I wasn't going to. "I tell everyone," he said. "I like to be consistent." That night I put the phone in the kitchen drawer and told myself if it buzzed I didn't care. I lay in bed and watched the ceiling light bleed lines when cars went by. Somewhere after midnight I slept. Somewhere before 4 I woke to the feeling that someone had said my name right next to my ear in the dark. Not the nickname. My name, the one I use here. For a second I thought it was in the room. Then I heard the call log tone in my head because habits make sounds feel real. I went to the kitchen and took out the phone. Another missed call, same caller ID, same timestamp on the voicemail, 3:19 a.m. I pressed play, and before the wind, before the waves, there was a muffled click like a finger covering a mic and a breath that wasn't mine. And then clearer than before, "Come down. Gudu." The next morning I called my mother in Karachi because I needed to hear a voice I trusted say the ordinary things that make the world solid. She asked if I was eating. She asked if the cold was making my bones ache like she warned me. I asked her, without telling her why, if anyone there had mentioned me to anyone outside the family recently with my nickname. She said no. Who would she tell? She scolded me for worrying about small things when I should be worrying about big things like marriage and the rent. I let her. I stopped sleeping through 3:19 a.m. It felt like the time itself had teeth. The calls never came when airplane mode was off, which should have been proof of some glitch with the radio that only faked a missed call while disconnected. But the part of me that likes lists couldn't make the numbers behave. The voicemails always played. Each one had the same baseline, wind and sea, and then a variation. Once I heard other voices behind the main one, very far off, like a crowd at a beach a kilometer away. Once there was a sound that could have been a gull, except it had a wet in and out to it like a person breathing through a blocked nose. Once I heard what sounded like something metal being dragged across rock. That one I stopped after 5 seconds because I didn't want to know what came next. Liam came back from Newcastle and, without making a joke, offered to come run with me to the cemetery. I said no, he came anyway. We went at noon on a Sunday to stack the deck in our favor with sunlight and people and dogs that shook water into rainbows. We stopped at the fence and he said, "So we just hang out and wait for a ghost to call?" "Don't say it like that," I said. "How am I supposed to say it?" We waited. My phone was on airplane mode, no buzz. Liam, who cannot not talk, drifted over to the fence and read names. I watched the water. Keen appeared a few minutes later, a stack of laminated notices under his arm. He nodded at me and at Liam and then at our shoes, which were a little too close to the bottom rail of the fence for his taste. "Don't climb," he said. "We're not," Liam said. "We're here for the, wind." "Good wind today," Keen said. His eyes flicked to my phone like he could hear it through my pocket. Then he moved on. After 15 minutes of nothing, Liam's patience started to fray. "Maybe your ghost is on a tea break." "I told you not to say ghost," I said. "What, haunting's a slur now?" We gave it 20 more minutes and then left, and I felt worse instead of better. Because the story you can't repeat in front of someone else is the story that owns you. On Tuesday at work, my manager asked if I was sleep-deprived because I moved a decimal in a way that made a number in a spreadsheet look like a lottery win. I went into a phone forum in the afternoon, a place where people argue about models like their religion, and I wrote a post asking if anyone had ever gotten voicemails while on airplane mode. The answers were boring, even the snide ones. "No, bro, impossible. Maybe you turned it on after the call. Maybe your voicemail app caches. Maybe your provider is laggy." Then a private message came in from a user with a numeric handle and a profile that looked like it had been created that day. It said, "If the calls are only at one place, don't go back there. If there's a name for what you're getting, I don't want to know it. Delete this message." I didn't delete it. I read it until the words blurred. The next step was dumb. I know that. But there's a particular kind of dumb that happens when you persuade yourself you're above being persuaded. I told myself I would go back to the cemetery at night once, just once, with every normal, grounded thing on my side, flashlight, common sense, fence between me and the edge, and I would stand there and let the wind be wind and the sea be sea and prove to myself my head was making the rest. I didn't tell Liam, I didn't tell anyone. I walked down to the coastal path at 11 on a Thursday, with my hood up and my hands jammed into my pockets so I wouldn't put them on the fence without thinking. There is a different world on that walk at night. Lights from the houses step down the hill like people staring. The cemetery is a blacker patch of black. The ocean has moods you don't get during the day. It pushes and pulls with purpose. The wind came from the south and smelled like weed and wet stone. My phone was on airplane mode in my pocket, screen dark. I stood at the fence and did nothing for a long time. When the buzz came, it wasn't a buzz. It was like someone tracing a cold finger down my spine. My pocket vibrated soft and twice. I took out the phone and didn't look at the water. The lock screen said 11:48 p.m. A missed call notification sat there like a little white stone. Unknown below, a voicemail icon pulsed. I should have left. I pressed play. The first part of the recording was louder than any before. The mic hit wind like a wall. It clipped and hissed. In the gaps, I could hear a rhythm I hadn't in the others. Something like the regular sprint of water through a narrow place. Then the voice spoke, not far this time, not radio distant. It said, "Turn around," in a tone a parent uses when they found a child doing something dangerous. I didn't. I felt stubborn and stupid and angry in a way I hadn't expected to feel. I kept my eyes on the screen because it was easier than looking at either direction. The voice said my name, not the nickname. My name here. The exact pronunciation Liam uses when he wants me to pass the remote. Then it said, almost conversational, "I'm down here." I turned then, not toward the ocean, toward the rows of headstones, the small ones and the tall ones, the crosses and angels. the rounded shoulders of stones with dates that began in the 1800s. The path behind me was empty. The grass between the plots was wet, and a mist had risen from somewhere lower than me like breath off a lake. A row of graves ran right up to the fence where I stood. The nearest headstone was polished granite with gold letters that picked up nothing from the night. I couldn't see a person anywhere. I put the phone to my ear like that would make a difference to a recording. The voice said in the same almost conversational tone, "Just a bit further." That was when the first step of the thought arrived. I could climb. It wasn't even a sentence. It was a picture. One leg over the fence, then the other, landing on the damp grass, walking between stones to the drop where the invisible path goes down to the ledge, where fishermen sometimes cast at stupid hours. I don't fish. I don't climb well. I would never in my life. But there it was, the image, not mine, so smoothly placed in my mind that for a second I thought I'd been about to climb before this new thought told me. The phone screen flashed. For a heartbeat, I saw the camera open by itself, the view of my chin and the fence and the dark behind me. And then it closed again and returned to the voicemail player as if nothing had happened. My heart beat hard enough I could feel it in my teeth. I stepped back from the fence. "Don't," the voice said, very soft and very clear. It sounded in that second like one of my uncles at a funeral when he had to remind my cousins not to touch a body. It sounded like care. It sounded like love. And that was worse than any coaxing. The beam of a flashlight washed the path. I flinched like a thief. Keene stepped out of the dark, his high-vis jacket throwing back the light and bars. His face looked older in the white spill. He didn't point the beam at me, just at the ground so we could see each other's shoes. "Evening," he said, like I'd bumped into him at a shop. He held up a hand, palm out, the way you do to a skittish dog. "Step back from the fence, mate." "I'm not climbing," I said. I was ashamed of how defensive I sounded. "No one ever is," he said. That was when I realized he hadn't said anything funny since I'd met him. His voice has exactly one color, and it is this careful gray. Phone's not going to help. I lifted it anyway, like proof of normality. The screen was blank now, the voicemail stopped. The latest missed call sat at the top of the list with the time. 11:47 p.m. "Do you believe in ghosts?" I asked him, because I couldn't think of any other way to ask the thing I needed to ask. He looked at me a long time. If I'm honest, he looked past me, through me, to the ocean behind. The way you look at a sound to place it. "I believe he said slowly, "that if you let the wind tell you what to do, you end up doing what the wind wants. And the wind doesn't care if you live." He took a step closer, not close enough to touch me, but close enough that if I had panicked and bolted, I would have had to go through him. "Go home," I went. He walked with me to the lit part of the path and then turned back toward the fences like that was where his day always ended. I went home and put the phone in the freezer, because that is what my brain offered to do with a thing that felt alive. After 3 minutes, I took it out because I needed to know that was stupid. I slept on the sofa with the TV on mute and woke at 3:19 a.m. anyway. No call. The next night it came back. The weeks after that were an ugly smear. I stopped running. I stopped sleeping. I took my phone to another provider and bought a SIM on a whim and put it in and took it out again, because the calls came without a SIM. I turned off every setting that could call anything in the dark or the light. I factory reset. I bought a cheap second phone and used it for work and hid the other. The calls continued on the first. Always unknown below, always a voicemail. The label stuck. Not no caller ID, not unknown. That extra word made it a message. I started to think in divide by two logic. If the calls know me and they know where I am and they know airplane mode, then they know more than me. That way madness lives. Zara from my office. Friendly, not flirting. The kind of coworker who says go home when you look like you need to. Came by my desk one afternoon and said, "You look like you saw something you can't put down." I said I had a mouse in my kitchen. She told me to get steel wool. Then she said, "I used to walk the coastal path after my father died. If you ever want company?" I almost said yes. I almost told her everything. I said I had it handled instead because pride is a habit you don't know you have until it knocks you down a set of stairs. 2 things happened that broke me out of that loop. The first was an image. On a Sunday morning when the light was thin and the whole city looked like it needed a bath, I found a new thumbnail in my photo gallery. A little gray square with a sliver of green and a sliver of black and the date stamp of 2 nights before. I hadn't taken it. The metadata said 11:48 p.m. The location tag said, "No location data." When I tapped it, the photo opened into a view I didn't recognize. It took me a second to realize why. The camera was pointed straight down at something like a slit. On one side, sandstone, pale and pitted. On the other side, darkness. In the darkness, something wet, not shining like water. Matty, like a rock that's been under for a long time. Along the edge of the slit, a line of growth. I thought seaweed until I saw it had a fine structure like hair. The picture made my fingertips ache the way they do when you think of touching something too cold. I deleted it. It went to the recently deleted folder. I emptied that. That night, another missed call came at 3:19 a.m., and in the morning, the photo was back. Same timestamp, slightly different angle. The second thing was a man's voice on the path. I went back in daylight on purpose because I was sick of being guided by shadows. I stood at the fence where I always did. The sea was ordinary, which means it could kill you but didn't feel like it was trying yet. A man in a wetsuit stood down on the fisherman's ledge 2 levels below the fence, anchored by a rope around his waist to a steel ring someone had bolted into the rock years ago. He had a bucket beside him and a line in his hands. He was whistling between his teeth. I raised a hand to show I wasn't police or anything, and he nodded. He could see me, but we couldn't have spoken without shouting. He turned to throw his line and paused like he'd remembered something. He looked up again, cupped his hands to his mouth, and called something. The wind shredded it. He tried again. I made the universal what gesture. He pointed at the cliff below me, then at his eyes, then shook his head slow. Not no, more be careful what you look at. He cast his line. The rope at his waist jumped and went slack and jumped again. He pulled and set his feet and pulled. Then he stopped pulling and went very still. He looked down at the bucket, then up at me, then left, toward the mouth of the little channel where the swell runs in and out like a breath. He took a step, another. He let the line go, he leaned. He would have fallen if he hadn't remembered the rope at his waist. He put a hand on the rock to steady himself. Fingers splayed like he was pushing against something that was pushing back. I don't know how I knew what I knew, but I knew. He was hearing it too. Not my name, his. I waved and shouted. I could tell he heard me because he shook his head hard, the way you do when you come out of a daydream. He looked at me with a raw, embarrassed anger I recognized because I'd worn it. He hauled his rope hand over hand back to the ring and tied a knot so clean it made me like him. He packed up the line in the bucket and scrambled back up the path like a man leaving a place he loves because this time, it almost took him. When he reached me, his lips were white and he didn't say anything at first. Then he said, "Don't bring a phone," as if that mattered more than anything else, and left. 2 nights later, the final call came, though I don't know if it was final or if I just stopped answering. There was a southerly blowing, one of those ugly, honest winds that sweeps the city raw. The time was 3:19 a.m. because of course it was. The voicemail was longer than the others. The wind surged in and out. In the gaps, I heard something I had never heard on any of the recordings. My mother's voice saying my name as if to wake me gently. Not the nickname, not the soft child sound, but the name she uses when I leave the house. Not a recording of my mother. My mother in Karachi asleep, not calling me. Then it slid, like a needle finding another groove, into the voice that had called me down all those nights. "We're below," it said, as if that were a reassurance. "Come down." I wrapped the phone in a towel and put it in the bottom drawer with the frying pans and went to the living room and lay on the floor because the sofa felt like it was looking at me. When I woke, the light had that bald look of morning after a bad night. I took the phone out of the drawer and checked the photos. Another new one, same slit, same hair-like fringe, but this time there was something else in the frame at the top edge. The smallest curve of something pale and smooth and oval, like the top of a skull if you stood directly above it and looked down. I closed the photo. I opened it. I sent it to a folder on my laptop called Taxes because I knew I would only open that when I had to. Then I wiped the phone again, factory reset, and carried it to the bin area behind our building. I lifted the lid of the general waste and dropped the phone in, and then stood there like an idiot, waiting to feel either relief or grief, and felt neither. I went upstairs. I made coffee. I didn't sleep that night or much since. There are small coda notes, the sort of things people ask for when you tell them a story like this because they hope for closure like it's a product you can buy. I called my provider and asked for a list of calls to my number in the past month. They sent me a PDF with dates and times. The calls at 3:19 a.m. were not on it. The voicemail server showed a ping each of those nights. No source number. The label unknown below is not a thing my phone knows how to make. Liam found my phone in the bin 2 days after I threw it away because garbage pickup was delayed, and he brought it upstairs and put it on the counter like a dog delivering a stick. He said, "You dropped this," and I said, "Keep it," and he didn't. He took it to an e-waste drop-off. I bought a different phone. I don't take it out with me on the coastal walk. I don't go past Bronte anymore. I run on a treadmill at a gym that smells like rubber and disinfectant, where the only wind is from fans. Sometimes at 3:19 a.m., my new phone vibrates on the nightstand with a quiet nudge that is probably a calendar sync or an app I forgot to uninstall. I don't check it. I look at the wall and recite to myself the list of what's real. The bed, the lamp, the small chip in the paint near the skirting board, the sound of a car 2 streets over. It helps until it doesn't. Once in the middle of a meeting at work, I opened that taxes folder I'd named for camouflage and looked at the photos because I needed to see if my brain had embroidered them. They hadn't changed. The third one still has that curve at the top of the frame. It could be a trick of the light. It could be seafoam caught in a pocket. It could be nothing at all. The last time I saw Keen, he was pinning a laminated notice to the fence that said something in calm municipal words about safety and the cliff. I thanked him for nothing in particular. He said, "It's quieter when the wind's westerly," like that was an answer to another question. Then he added in that grave voice that never jokes, "You don't have to prove anything to the ocean." Zara from my office asked me last week if I was sleeping better. I said yes and meant it, because the shape of insomnia is a thing you adjust to like a new pair of shoes that rub. She asked if I wanted to walk the coastal path some evening, just to see the whales if we could. I said maybe next month when it's warmer. She said okay. She didn't press. We stood at the window and pretended to see movement far out. It's easy to say the calls were a glitch because glitches don't ask you to step over a fence. It's easy to say the voice wasn't real because real things have addresses. The thing I keep going back to is small and ridiculous. On the first voicemail after the wind and before the wave, when my nickname slides through the mic like someone said it inside a conch shell, there's another sound like a tongue catching on teeth, a tiny click. My aunt had that sound when she said it. She used to stand at the door and call me in from the lane in the heat of the afternoon, so I wouldn't wander off into traffic. She'd make that click and say the name and I'd come. Some nights I wake with the surety that if I walked down to Waverly at 3:19, I would not hear my name. I would hear someone else's. Someone walking ahead of me or behind me. A runner with white earbuds and a hat against the wind. A woman in a long coat. A man in a wetsuit bowing toward water he can't see. I lie there until the certainty passes. At dawn, the path fills with people again, and the cemetery goes back to being a postcard that makes everyone who lives near it speak in that special tone city people get when they show you a sight. Beautiful, they say, unbelievable, the dead get the best view. If you run that path in the dark, you'll know where I mean. There's a section where the railing curves and the fence leans, and the slabs of stone closest to the edge carry names that are lowercase in your mind because you don't want to make them larger. If your phone vibrates there while it can't and you take it out, and you see a name that isn't a number and isn't a person and isn't anything that should exist, do what I didn't. Put the phone back in your pocket. Keep your hands off the fence. Let the wind say what it wants. Let it call you what it wants. It only wants you to come down. That's all it has ever wanted. That's all it will ever want.